Chapter 77. In the center of the valley, the atmosphere was a little stiff and no one spoke for a long time. Lu Chen stood in the middle of the circle and slowly turned around to look at his surroundings. All he could see was a desolate scene. However, in his eyes, there seemed to be another scene that was so hot that it was suffocating. It was a burning flame, a huge pillar of light that fell from the sky, a magnificent power that could split the heavens and the earth, and a light shadow that shattered into countless pieces like a nightmare. Along with it, there was also the pain of the black flame that seemed to be engraved in the depths of his soul and would never be forgotten. "I'm not your disciple." Lu Chen suddenly smiled. Looking at the bald fatty, he said calmly, "You're the high and mighty perfected Lord Tianlan, who is respected by all, and I'm just a shadow in a dark corner." After he said that, the expression of the bald fatty, who had a dignified and imposing manner that seemed to be able to swallow the world, or rather, the legendary figure perfected Lord Tianlan, suddenly changed. He lowered his head slightly, and there seemed to be a touch of pain in the depths of his eyes. After a while, he smiled bitterly and said, "Do you hate me in your heart?" Lu Chen shook his head slowly with a complicated expression, as if recalling something from the past. He said, "I don't think so. It's just that I often have nightmares over the years. I dream that I killed a lot of people. I dream that the ground is covered with fire and blood, and I dream that there are mountains of corpses and seas of blood." Perfected Lord Tianlan frowned, and a strange expression flashed across his face. He asked, "What happened?" After a moment of silence, Lu Chen looked up at him and said, "Back then, after I secretly destroyed the god-vanquishing spell here, the black flame curse immediately took effect and burned my flesh and soul. I was in great pain, and my mind became muddled. I only vaguely remember that I walked out of the valley, and there seemed to be a fight in the middle. The bloody scenes in my dreams seemed to be from that time." "You didn't remember wrongly." Perfected Lord Tianlan suddenly interrupted him and said indifferently, "The plan that we made that day was to cooperate with each other from the inside. After you destroyed the god-vanquishing spell in the valley, Zhengxianmeng's army launched a fierce attack from outside. Because most of the elites of the Three Realms fiend cult were gathered here, the battle was extremely tragic. The mountains of corpses and seas of blood you saw were probably the scene at that time." Lu Chen was stunned, as if he didn't expect perfected Lord Tianlan to be so direct. He hesitated for a moment and said, "Is that so? Then I dreamed that I killed a lot of people." Perfected Lord Tianlan said, "No. You fainted not long after you left the valley and was saved by someone. You didn't fight for long." "You didn't fight. You didn't of fighting at all. Of the battle that year. You saw." Lu Chen was silent for a long time, but the gloominess on his face gradually lessened and he seemed to be more relaxed. After a while, he let out a long breath. Perfected Lord Tianlan sighed softly and said, "It's my fault. If I could meet you once in all these years, maybe you wouldn't be so sad." Lu Chen shook his head and said, "It's none of your business." "Oh right, Elder Yun Shouyang of the fiend cult had a son and a daughter. The son's name was Yun Jian and the daughter was Yun Shaoqing. Do you know what happened to them?" Perfected Lord Tianlan pondered for a moment and said, "They died in that battle." Lu Chen hesitated for a moment and said, "How did they die?" Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at him and said, "When Zhengxianmeng's army besieged the valley, they resisted stubbornly with other evildoers of the fiend cult and killed many of our cultivators. They were killed in the battle." "They died in the battle?" "Yes." Lu Chen was silent again. After a while, he suddenly shook his head and sighed. Then, he looked at perfected Lord Tianlan and his eyes seemed to have regained some of their original brightness. He said, "All right, after saying so much nonsense, you still haven't told me why you're looking for me." Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled and said, "That's right. A good man should face life with a smile." Lu Chen snorted and said, "Easy for you to say. If you're capable, let the black fire burn for 10 years before saying that." As he spoke, he was still a little indignant. He cursed under his breath and said in a low voice, "Damn fatty." Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled and shook his head, as if he did not hear that complaint. He said, I do have something that I need your help with. What is it? Go to the Kunlun party and find an evildoer of the fiend cult that has been in hiding for many years. 5 years ago, one of my secret agents in Fuyunji accidentally discovered a certain stronghold of the fiend cult in the Immortal City. Then, under Shui Ying's leadership, Fuyunji put in a lot of effort and finally sent people to infiltrate it. However, after the battle in the valley, the fiend cult that was greatly weakened became more cautious and the infiltrators could not get close to the core. Until a month ago, we suddenly received a secret letter from him, saying that he had already found out that the fiend cult was secretly setting up a great conspiracy and the person in charge was a fiend cult elder. When Lu Chen heard this, his pupils suddenly constricted. Perfected Lord Tianlan glanced at him indifferently and continued, however, things suddenly changed at this point. The people of the devil cult suddenly noticed this and immediately counterattacked. We also tried our best to help, but we were still a step too late. That person is dead. Before he died, he only said 2 things to me. 1. There is a spy of the fiend cult in the Immortal Alliance and his position is extremely high. 2. The fiend cult has a great plan, but there is a key person in their plan who is still hiding in the Kunlun party. We don't know his intentions, but once that person completes the mission, the fiend cult will definitely succeed. The severity of the disaster is even greater than the disaster of the gods subduing curse in the valley. The valley became quiet again. For a long time, the 2 of them did not speak. After a while, Lu Chen said softly, Why me? It's not like you don't know that the black flame curse has almost destroyed my cultivation. Now I am not much different from a mortal. Perfected Lord Tianlan shook his head and said, In this kind of matter, cultivation is not the most important. Even 10 or 100 Jin Dan Friar may not be able to compare to you. Lu Chen smiled bitterly. Perfected Lord Tianlan said, Actually I don't need to say something and you will also understand. Zheng Xianmeng is now too powerful, bloated, and incompetent. The spy in a high position that the Death Warrior said is indeed possible. Since that is the case, everything that starts from Zheng Xianmeng will be like a sieve, we can't continue. To do this, we must find a person who even Zheng Xianmeng does not know. Lu Chen laughed self-deprecatingly and said, Then it will be me? But don't forget, the remnants of the fiend cult are still searching for the whereabouts of that black wolf. But they can't find it. Perfected Lord Tianlan said lightly, There are only 2 people in the world who really know your identity. And other than you, I can't think of anyone else who knows the origins, cuts, codes, history, habits, and all kinds of secret matters of the 3 realms divine sect like the back of his hand. To find that deeply hidden evildoer of the fiend cult, only you can do it. Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at Lu Chen with a solemn expression and said word by word. Chapter 78. Lu Chen remained silent for a long time before he asked in a soft voice, You trust me that much? Perfected Lord Tianlan said, The demons of the devil cult are as cunning as foxes and they are everywhere. But if I had to choose someone who would never conspire with the devil cult, would only trust you. I don't want to go. Lu Chen said. Perfected Lord Tianlan frowned and asked, Why? Lu Chen raised his head to look at him and said, In these 10 years, every time the black fire burns my body, I feel like I'm better off dead. When I think of all the things I've done in the past, the wind blades, the frost swords, and the blood on my hands, I sometimes wonder if all the suffering I've endured was worth it. For the people of the world or for the righteous path? Lu Chen's face was a little bleak as he said, You told me these words since I was young. I believed it and did it. But now, I feel that this idea is quite meaningless. He looked at Perfected Lord Tianlan and said word by word, What does the people of the world and the righteous path have to do with me? Why should I risk my life and suffer for those people I don't know and have nothing to do with? Lu Chen looked at Perfected Lord Tianlan quietly and said, Not to mention me, aren't you the same? All these years, you are the one who suppressed the devil cult the most in Zheng Xianmeng, but what about the others? Aren't they all muddling along and living a befuddled life? How many people laugh at you behind your back for giving up your leisurely celestial life and insist on tormenting others? Not only that, there are probably countless people who hate and blame you just because you refuse to give in and block their path to wealth. Among them, there are even a few perfected lords with the same status as you. Perfected Lord Tianlan sighed and said, "Are you saying that it's a thankless task for me?" "Yes." Lu Chen said, "Why do you ask for trouble? With your current status and cultivation realm, no matter how arrogant the people of the devil cult are, as long as you don't go against them, they won't dare to provoke you easily. Even if they harm the world, they won't implicate you. Isn't that right?" Perfected Lord Tianlan fell silent. After a while, he suddenly laughed and said, "What you said seems to make sense." Lu Chen said, "Of course." Perfected Lord Tianlan said, "Are you done?" "I'm done." Perfected Lord Tianlan thought for a moment and said, "Little Lu, listen to me. A real man is born between heaven and earth. Don't always be calculative. You have to broaden your horizons. As the saying goes, set your heart for heaven and earth, set your life for the people, continue learning for the saints, and establish peace for all ages. Open your head." Lu Chen scolded, "Damn Baldy, what are you pretending for? You were originally a good fatty, but after saying that, you immediately became as stupid as a pig. Do you understand the meaning of these words? It's probably that when you read between the lines, you feel especially impressive. When you say it, you feel as if you're floating in the air, thinking that you're a cut above others, right? Let me tell you, stop putting on an act in front of me. You only know how to deceive people who don't read much." Perfected Lord Tianlan was not angry. Instead, he smiled. "You've been in a bad temper recently. I've already told you those grand principles 10 years ago. Do you mean that you don't want to listen anymore?" Lu Chen said, "I don't want to listen anymore, it's annoying." Let's put it another way. Look at how long the world is. You and I are born in this world and there are always some things that have to be done. Even if there are millions of people, I'll still go forward. A real man is hot-blooded for the people of the world. Hey, what do you mean by waving that finger at me?" Lu Chen scoffed coldly and retracted his middle finger. "Damn Baldy, if you say such nonsense again, I'll spit on you." Perfected Lord Tianlan rubbed his shiny bald head, looking a little awkward. Then, he smiled. I'm used to it. You know, back in Zhengxianmeng, I had to coax those simple-minded young people to work for the righteous path of the world. I had to say that." Scram! Lu Chen interrupted him rudely. "Is there a single word of truth? I'll let it slide if you lie to me to work for you for 10 years. If you don't say it now, I'm leaving." "Say what? Speak human language. Give me a reason, why do the two of us not want to live a comfortable life, and must fight to the death against the evil cult, this kind of vicious and evil people? Can I not say it?" "No." Boom! Suddenly, there was a loud sound. It was Perfected Lord Tianlan who slapped the ground beside him. Instantly, a dragon roar and tiger roar could be heard from deep underground. The ground trembled and a few foot-wide cracks appeared. Cracking sounds spread in all directions as countless gravel flew into the air. "All right, I'll say it." Perfected Lord Tianlan's smile disappeared and his robes fluttered without any wind. Suddenly, his aura skyrocketed like a god or a demon. Looking at him, there was an illusion that he was indomitable. He shouted loudly, "I've King hated those idiots from the 3 realms for a long time." His shout was like thunder exploding in the sky. Immediately, dark clouds rolled in the horizon and the sky changed color. Thunder rumbled from afar and the wind and clouds surged in the vast valley. The sound echoed from the surrounding cliffs as if the entire world was echoing that sentence. Lu Chen frowned and shook his head. His ears were still ringing non-stop, and even his head was faintly aching. It could be seen that the power of that soul formation true monarch's angry shout just now was truly terrifying. After a while, when the roar in his head gradually calmed down, he looked up at Perfected Lord Tianlan with a strange expression. "Just because of this?" Perfected Lord Tianlan harumphed coldly with a straight face. These fools are always stirring up trouble. For the sake of some weird idea of unifying the three realms, they're going all out and causing trouble, causing us no peace. I've always liked the world to be peaceful since I was born. I like the skies to be clear and the people to live in peace. I'll look down on the common people to prove the great Tao of immortality. In the end, I was almost annoyed to death by them. Since they're making me unhappy, shouldn't I kill them? Lu Chen looked at the bald fatty for a long time and suddenly laughed. It's been 10 years and you've become so vulgar. Where's the majestic aura of a soul formation perfected lord? Perfected Lord Tianlan spat. It's all because I was angered by you, my traitorous disciple. Lu Chen waved it off. Don't say that. Back then, you told me clearly that you didn't acknowledge me as your disciple after I joined the fiend cult. Even if I die in front of you, I'll just die on my own. Perfected Lord Tianlan froze for a moment and suddenly fell silent. After a while, he sighed and said in a low voice, "You still remember it so clearly." Lu Chen did not reply and merely said, "Cut the crap. What do I get out of working for you this time round?" Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled. "Although I don't like fiend cults, eradicating them is for the sake of all living beings in the world. Isn't it a little inappropriate for you to ask for benefits out of the blue?" Lu Chen snorted disdainfully and said, "Is there?" "Yes." Perfected Lord Tianlan straightened his body and expression. After pondering for a moment, he looked at Lu Chen and said in a deep voice, "Apart from you, I have no other successor in my life. Now that this is over, I'll let you acknowledge your ancestors and join my Kunlun sect." Lu Chen harumphed and did not say anything. "I'll impart everything I've learned to you. Everything I have will belong to you. I truly feel guilty for the sufferings you've suffered in the past. Once this is over, I'll allow you to walk out of the shadows and stand in the light of the world. From then on, you'll be able to hold your head high and become a righteous disciple of a famous sect. Even if it's that 5,000-year-old Kunlun sect, as long as you have the opportunity, luck, and strength in the future, this old man will do his best to help you rise to the top. Why can't I hand over this famous sect to you?" At this point, Perfected Lord Tianlan suddenly stood up. He was actually a shoulder taller than an ordinary person and his figure was strangely majestic. He looked like a mountain as he said word by word, "How about this?" Lu Chen frowned but still did not say anything. Chapter 79. After a long silence in the valley, Lu Chen sighed and said, "I'll agree to it." Perfected Lord Tianlan raised his brows and revealed a gratified smile. "Really? That's great. But I thought you wouldn't agree so easily." Lu Chen said indifferently, "The world is full of hardships and unfairness. For the sake of the people in the world, for the sake of the righteous path in the world, there are some things that have to be done." Perfected Lord Tianlan said, "How did you become like this after 10 years? You have a bright future. I learned all this nonsense from you." Lu Chen shook his head and said, "Those guys are always after me. I've been hiding for 10 years and I'm tired of hiding. I might as well take this opportunity to destroy them and get rid of all future troubles." This time, it was Perfected Lord Tianlan's eyes that flashed with surprise. "How can you be so sure that we can take this opportunity to destroy the fiend cult of the three realms?" Lu Chen smiled faintly. "I've been in the fiend cult for too long and I'm too familiar with their methods. Those fellows are all lunatics. Every single one of them wants to do something, but once they do, they want to do something that will shake the world and shake the earth." He glanced at Perfected Lord Tianlan and narrowed his eyes. His eyes gradually revealed a trace of coldness as though he had returned to the black-robed youth whose hands were stained with blood. He said coldly, 10 years ago, 3 out of 5 elders of the fiend cult were killed in the battle with the god-vanquishing curse. Now, they're plotting something big again. According to what you said, the consequences are even worse than the god-vanquishing curse. As such, we have to gather the strength of the entire fiend cult for us to have any hope. Since that's the case, isn't this our chance? Perfected Lord Tianlan took a deep look at Lu Chen. His eyes were as bright as a blade. He paced back and forth and nodded. Makes sense. He then smiled. Indeed, you're the only one who can deal with the fiend cult of the three realms. Lu Chen snorted coldly and did not reply. After a moment of silence, he said, however, I still have a few things to tell you when I go to Kunlun. Speak. Lu Chen said, how do I join the Kunlun party? Perfected Lord Tianlan said, I am a perfected lord from the Kunlun party. It's too easy for me to arrange for a nobody like you to enter the sect. Naturally, it'll be done without anyone knowing. Don't worry. Lu Chen nodded and said, that's good. However, the Kunlun party has a disciple in the Qi refining state, Hong Chuan. He came to Qingshidang village where I live in seclusion and met me before. We even have some contacts. Maybe there are some hidden dangers? Perfected Lord Tianlan said indifferently, I'll get someone to send him out to work first. He'll come back after a year or so. Yes. Lu Chen continued, do you have any idea what the devil cult demons lurking in the Kunlun party are planning? This time, Perfected Lord Tianlan pondered for a while, then shook his head and said, the Kunlun party is a famous sect with 5,000 years of history. Although I'm a perfected lord, I can't completely grasp the sect's secrets. Currently, I know nothing about that person, so I can't tell you anything. Alright, Lu Chen smiled in a self-deprecating manner and said, anyway, it's not the first time. Perfected Lord Tianlan said, if there's nothing else, go find Xiao Ma and let him take you to Kunwas City first. I'll make arrangements later. Lu Chen nodded and turned to leave. However, after walking for about 10 feet, he suddenly heard Perfected Lord Tianlan's voice coming from behind. Oh yes, there's something I've wanted to ask you for a long time. Lu Chen turned to look at the unusually tall bald fatty and said, what is it? Perfected Lord Tianlan stared at him and said slowly, you joined the devil cult when you were young and hid for many years. During this period, you lived with the devil cult demons day and night. Do you know any close friends? Lu Chen was silent for a while, as if he was recalling the past. Then, he looked at Perfected Lord Tianlan's calm but unfathomable eyes. His expression did not change and he said calmly, no. On the other side of the valley, at the edge of the stone wall, a huge jade-horned green bull was lazily kneeling on the ground, and beside it, the pitifully small black dog, Atu, was cowering and hiding at the side. Seeing that oxen had been lazy since the beginning and didn't seem to want to pay attention to it, Atsu finally calmed down a little after its initial panic. When oxen turned its head back and seemed to be dozing off again, Atsu shrunk its body and slowly moved backward bit by bit. Its movements were particularly cautious, as if it was afraid of making the slightest sound and startling this huge monster. However, it was somewhat unfortunate that although Atsu retreated quietly, at this moment, a thunderous roar suddenly came from the center of the vast valley. I have long disliked you for a long time. The roaring sound waves seemed to have substance, instantly sweeping up millions of dust and sand. Like a storm, it swept over and heavily smashed against the hard stone wall. Atu was actually shocked, and immediately after, he suddenly cried out in fear. It was because his body was blown by a gust of wind that came out of nowhere, and the force actually swept his entire body into the air, and then he was about to smash into the stone. At this critical moment, a huge shadow suddenly approached from the storm of dust and sand. Then, a thick rope-like object flew over and directly wrapped around Atsu in midair. Just as this little black dog was about to hit the hard stone wall and break its head and bleed, it was forcibly pulled back. Atsu barked wildly. Its 4 legs struggled desperately, but at this moment, it could not control itself. It was directly pulled to the other side of the sandstorm, and a moment later, it fell heavily to the ground. After a while, the sudden roar disappeared, and the inexplicable strange wind also disappeared. Only then did Atsu realize that it had fallen back to the side of the huge oxen, and the thing that had just saved it seemed to be this oxen's tail. Oxen's thick and long tail swung behind it and retracted. Then, its huge head turned to look at this little dog, and then it turned back expressionlessly. It seemed that the action just now, for this rare oxen, was just a small effort that it did when it was in a good mood. It was not worth mentioning at all. Atsu lay on the ground in a daze for a while. Suddenly, it barked, jumped up, and ran away. Oxen seemed to be a little surprised. It looked back and saw that the dog was running away in a panic. After watching for a while, it swung its tail again and let out a low moo. Atsu ran all the way, and it didn't take long to run back to the entrance of the valley. Only then did it stop to catch its breath. After a while, Lu Chen also came out. Atsu quickly leaned over and used its head to rub against Lu Chen's leg. Lu Chen seemed to have something on his mind. He did not notice anything wrong with Atsu. He just gently touched its head with his hand and continued to walk out. Atsu looked back in that direction, barked twice, shook its head, and ran away with Lu Chen. Chapter 80. Do you know, sometimes I'm very suspicious of your identity and background? On the hillside outside the valley, 2 people and a dog sat together. Lu Chen grabbed a drumstick that old Ma handed to him and ate it. At the same time, he mumbled something. Somehow, Old Horse had brought a lot of food with him. At this time, he took them all out and even grabbed a meat bone and threw it to Atsu. This made the black puppy so happy that it lay on the side and gnawed happily. The sound of chewing could be heard continuously. This puppy is not bad, but it's lame, Old Ma sighed and then turned to Lu Chen and said, "What did you say just now?" Lu Chen didn't even look at him and murmured again. Old Ma sneered and said, "I have a clean background, and I'm loyal and courageous." "What are you doubting?" Lu Chen glanced at him and sneered, "I've seen through you in the past 10 years. You're fat, ugly, and stupid. You can't even do business or cultivate, hey?" Old Ma said angrily, "Bastard, it's fine if you say I'm fat, but how can you say I'm stupid? If I didn't protect you for the past 10 years, you would have died many times." Lu Chen ignored Old Ma's protest and continued to say, "You're stupid, fat, and have low cultivation. But for more than 10 years, the famous Lord Tianlan didn't trust anyone and only let you hang out with me. If that damn Baldy didn't lie and really values me as much as he does, then there must be something wrong with your identity." He looked at Old Ma with interest and clicked his tongue. "Why does he trust a useless person like you so much? Are you the bastard son of that damn Baldy?" Old Ma was a little surprised. "Get out." Old Ma glared at him and said, "How dare you slander me when you're eating my food? Spit out the chicken." Lu Chen threw the chicken drumstick at him. Old Ma twisted his body and dodged it. "Hey, you're good at martial arts." Old Ma smiled proudly and said, "Of course, these days oh." Before Old Ma finished his words, he was interrupted by Lu Chen. He seemed to suddenly think of something and stared at Old Ma with a strange expression. He said, "That damn Baldy is a super fat man, but you're just an ordinary fat man. Are you really a dissolute man left by that damn Baldy when he was young?" "Bah!" Old Ma said angrily, "If you talk nonsense again, I'm going to fall out with you." Lu Chen laughed and clapped his hands. He reached out to Old Ma and said, "Do you have wine?" Old Ma threw a wine gourd over. Lu Chen caught it, opened the cork and took a big gulp. Then he let out a long breath and said, "Good wine." Old Ma looked at him. Gradually, his eyes softened. After a while, he sighed and said, "Have you really thought it through? It's hard to say whether this trip to Kunlun will be a blessing or a curse." Lu Chen smiled and looked at Old Ma. He said, "Shouldn't you help him and try to persuade me to go?" Old Ma shrugged and said, "It doesn't matter to me. Besides, I've stayed with you in that village for 10 years. To be honest, I don't want you to take the risk." Lu Chen was silent for a moment. Then he said indifferently, "I've thought about it. I want to go." Old Ma nodded and didn't say anything else. When he stood up and was about to pack his things, he lightly patted Lu Chen's shoulder. Lu Chen smiled at him gently. When they were packing their things and preparing to leave, Lu Chen asked Old Ma, after leaving Qingshideng village, "Where have you been? What have you been doing?" Old Ma didn't care about his image. He pulled up his waistband and patted his chubby belly. Then, he walked along the mountain path with Lu Chen and said, I've been recuperating. After I've recuperated, I went to Kunwa City and opened a small shop. Lu Chen paused and looked at him with a strange expression. He said, You've been preparing for this for a long time? Old Ma said indifferently, I can't say that I've been preparing for a long time. But since I had nothing to do anyway, I thought you'd definitely have a bad relationship with the Kunlun party in the future, so I just ran to Kunwa City. It'd be weird if I believed you. Lu Chen sneered and walked forward. However, a complicated light seemed to flash in the depths of his eyes. Atu ran past the two of them, shaking his head and wagging his tail excitedly. It was just that he was limping due to his leg injury, which made him look very awkward. Old Ma looked at it for a while and said to Lu Chen, What's the matter with this puppy? Lu Chen said, I picked it up on the road a few days ago. Old Ma was a bit surprised. He said, Huh? Has your temperament changed? Has your heart softened? Lu Chen said, No, I just thought that if I'm hungry and can't find anything to eat, I'll eat dog meat to stave off my hunger. Old Ma said. Just pretend I didn't say that. Lu Chen said, Right, since you've settled down in Kunwa City, I presume that with your means, you must have investigated a lot about the Kunlun party. Let me ask you something. Have there been any particularly outstanding young disciples in the Kunlun party recently? Old Ma smiled complacently. Soon after, he pondered with rapt attention for a while and said, The Kunlun party is a famous and large sect. It has many disciples and outstanding talents. Now that you've asked me this question, I don't know what to say. There are many candidates. Lu Chen thought for a while and said, A few days ago, somewhere in this chaotic land, I met someone in the middle of the night. As he said this, he told Old Ma about the situation that happened that night. Then he said, The moonlight slash is a Taoist technique that is extremely difficult to cultivate in Kunlun. It's difficult for people who aren't talented to cultivate it. Plus, the person was a young woman. Perhaps you know about it? Old Ma frowned. After thinking carefully for a while, he shook his head and said, I know about the moonlight slash, but I really can't think of any young female Kunlun party disciple who could cultivate this technique in the past few years. Let's go back to Kunwa City first. I'll help you secretly inquire about it. It shouldn't be a big problem to find that person. As he said this, he paused and said, What's wrong? You haven't even seen that woman's face yet. Why are you suddenly so interested in her? Lu Chen smiled and put a finger in front of his eyebrows. Then he slowly moved forward and lightly touched his forehead a few times. He said calmly, That night, the tip of her sword was right here. If it was just a little bit further forward, it would probably have pierced through my head. The smile on Old Ma's face suddenly faded a bit. He raised his eyes and looked at Lu Chen with a faintly worried expression. However, Lu Chen continued to talk without any change in his expression. He only said indifferently, It's been many years since someone pointed a sword at my head like this. Woof 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 woof. The Atsa dog in front of them had already run far away. It turned its head and barked at the two of them, seemingly urging them to hurry up. Lu Chen quickened his pace. At the same time, he calmly said, Find her. Old Ma nodded. He sighed and said, All right, I understand. Chapter 81. The Kunlun party got its name from the mountain. The entire sect was built on the Kunlun mountain range, which had the reputation of being the most famous mountain in the western continent. 5,000 years ago, a cultivator, Kun Yuanzi and Tai Luo, traveled the world. They passed by the western continent's Kunlun mountain range. It was a time of chaos. The spiritual mountain was covered in dust, and there were countless bandits. They killed and looted all day long, turning the area within 1,000 miles into a hell of water and fire. However, one night, there was a sudden change in the sky. Kun Yuanzi and Tai Luo both saw a huge star fall from the sky and fall into the mountain. That night, the mountain range trembled. Strange lights soared into the sky, and spiritual energy shrouded the mountains and covered the sun like clouds. In the following days, strange things happened around the Kunlun mountain. It snowed in the summer, and women took over the mourning. The land trembled several times a day, and there were signs of mountains collapsing and the earth cracking. The weather was also unpredictable. What's more, strange demons, ghosts, and demonic beasts appeared in the back of the mountain. They were ferocious and valiant. Although there weren't many of them, they often captured people for food. The people of the world were terrified and fled the mountain. No matter where they were, they all said that a great demon had appeared in the mountain, and that it would bring disaster to the world and slaughter all living things. Kunlun Mountain would become a sea of blood. However, Kun Yuanzi and Tai Luo had unique insight. They thought that this mountain was a supreme spiritual vein in the world and the foundation of a great cause. They bowed to the heavens and made a great vow. They were willing to become the master of the spiritual mountain. After that, the two of them used their great divine abilities to stabilize the world, slay demons, expel bandits, and appease the common people. During this period, their sincerity moved the heavens, and they obtained a great fortune in the depths of the spiritual mountain. They saw the immortal mansion. They obtained an ancient immortal jade book that passed down a peerless immortal technique. It was also said that there was a resplendent treasure light and a supreme immortal weapon. Since the fortune had arrived, there was nothing more to say. The two ancestors established a sect on this Kunlun mountain, accepted disciples, and established a great cause that would not last for 10,000 generations. This was the Kunlun party of today. The Kunlun party had been passed down for 5,000 years. Outstanding people had emerged in large numbers. The Kunlun party had always flourished in the world of human cultivators, which was truly an anomaly. The Kunlun party was founded 2,000 years earlier than Zhengxianmeng. It could be said to be the well-deserved number one sect in the cultivation world today. However, talented people emerged in every generation, and the new generation surpassed the old. In today's incomparably prosperous cultivation age, the human cultivation world was thriving. Countless geniuses and outstanding talents emerged one after another, and cultivation sects, large and small, were springing up like bamboo shoots after a rain. In terms of strength and prestige alone, the cultivation world of the divine central continent was already filled with heroes, and there was no longer a situation where one sect dominated. Today's Kunlun party had gone through 5,000 years of trials and hardships. It had already taken over the vast Kunlun mountain range as its private property. There were no less than 10,000 of its direct disciples who had achieved success in cultivation, and there was even a deity transformation stage true lord who had exceedingly high Daoist magic presiding over the sect. It could be said that it had an illustrious reputation and sat firmly on the throne of a famous sect. In addition, the Kunlun party also had disciples in the Qi refining realm who had just caught a glimpse of the door, as well as many miscellaneous disciples. There were even more people in this area, more than 100,000 in total. Such a large sect was also a behemoth in the vast western continent. Corresponding to it was Kunwas city at the foot of Kunlun Mountain SX. For thousands of years, it had gradually become one of the most prosperous and largest cities in this vast area. Have you been here before? When Old Ma and Lu Chen walked into this big city and walked in the bustling Kunwas city with tall buildings, Old Ma asked Lu Chen. Lu Chen nodded and said, "I've been here before." Huh? Old Ma was a bit surprised and said, "When?" "You've been with me for the past 10 years, and before that, you were working." "When did you get here?" Lu Chen's gaze swept over the spacious and flat streets of Kunwas city and said, "I was probably 5 or 6 years old. I don't remember too clearly." Old Ma was startled and asked, "What happened?" Lu Chen said, "I came to look for food. There are many people here, so I can find a lot of food in the garbage." Old Ma was silent. After a long time, he said, "What happened next?" Lu Chen smiled and said, "I don't know how much time has passed, but that damn Baldy suddenly appeared in front of me. He said he would let me eat my fill and wear my clothes. He told me to go with him, so I went with him." Old Ma sighed and seemed to want to say something, but Lu Chen suddenly turned around and waved his hand. He shouted with a smile, "Atsu, keep up. There are so many people here. If you get lost, you won't be able to find us. Woof, woof, woof. After a few barks, the lame black dog quickly ran over from the crowd behind them and affectionately rubbed against Lu Chen's feet. On the way from the land of chaos to Kunwa City, Atsu seemed to have grown a bit. It was unknown whether it was because Old Ma brought a lot of food, so this gluttonous dog ate as much as it could every day. Where's your shop? Lu Chen patted Atsu's head and turned to ask Old Ma, is it on this street? Old Ma glanced at the bustling street filled with shops and said without changing his expression, it's tasteless to open a shop in such a vulgar and noisy place. Come with me. Lu Chen immediately had a whole new level of respect for Old Ma. I haven't seen you for a while, but you've actually developed taste. TSK. Old Ma snorted disdainfully. He put his chubby hands behind his back and walked forward like a rich man. Lu Chen and Atsu followed behind him and walked down the street. They walked down another street. They walked down another street. After walking down another street. Another street. Hey! Lu Chen couldn't help but call out to the fat man who was already sweating profusely. He looked at him suspiciously and said, are we not there yet? Why do I feel like we're almost out of the city? Old Ma stopped and wiped the beads of sweat from his forehead. He glanced at the towering city wall in front of him and laughed, soon, soon. As he said this, he walked forward for a while and suddenly turned to the side. He walked into an alley by the side of the road. After walking for 2 or 3 feet, a wooden door appeared in front of them. Lu Chen stood in the alley and looked around. He saw that the place was deserted and there was no trace of anyone. It was a world of difference from the bustling streets that they had walked through before. On top of the wooden door, there was a signboard with 3 words written on it. Black Hill Pavilion. Do you have any business in this place? Lu Chen couldn't help but ask Old Ma. Old Ma sneered and said, what do you know? There's an old saying, fragrant wine needs no dark alley. Do you know that? As he said this, he took out a key and unlocked the door of the house. He led Lu Chen inside and said, besides, this place has a lot of benefits. In this noisy city, it's the best place to find peace and quiet. Walk 2 streets north and you'll reach the exit of the city gate. Walk 2 streets south and you'll reach the mansions of the influential families in the city. It's such a good place, but the price of the house can't even compare to a month's rent for an ordinary shop on the street in the center of Kunwa City. When I came here that day, I thought about it for a bit and decided to buy this house. In the future, it can be regarded as an ancestral property of my Old Ma family. After saying this, Old Ma looked complacent. He looked around and then looked at Lu Chen. He said with a smile, what do you think? Lu Chen said, if you don't have money, just say it. What's with all this nonsense? Chapter 82. Old Ma said. Big brother, poor people also have dignity. They also need to live. Lu Chen snorted and said, living is living. Who are you trying to fool with all that extravagant talk? Old Ma said seriously, although we are poor, we also need to have dreams, right? If you think about this place better, you will feel that this place is really not bad. Lu Chen shook his head and was speechless. He turned around and shouted, Atsu. Atsu barked and ran over, following Lu Chen and Old Ma inside. This house was actually not too small. It had 2 entrances, facing the street. Well, facing the alley was a front hall. Old Ma had made a counter. It seemed that he wanted to make it look like a shop. Behind it was a small courtyard. It was not big, but it was square, with a walkway on both sides. There were 2 more rooms at the back. They were not too big, but they were enough for people to sleep in. Hey, it's not bad. Lu Chen said to Old Ma. Old Ma immediately became happy. He laughed and said, I'm not wrong, am I? It's barely okay to live here, but forget about doing business. You won't be able to make a lot of money. Lu Chen stood in the barren courtyard and casually said, I just need to plant some rocks, grass, and 2 trees here. That should do it. Get lost. I don't have money to waste on those boring things. Lu Chen laughed and did not care. He asked casually, you just said that there are big families living in the city nearby? Old Ma scratched his head and said, oh, actually it's not too close. It's about 2 streets away. Over there is the gathering place of the old mansions of the influential families in the city. Quite a few of them have close relationships with the Kunlun party, whether overtly or covertly. Lu Chen nodded. This was also a matter of course. Kunwa City was at the foot of Kunlun Mountain, and with such a huge Kunlun party entrenched here, no matter who it was, they would want to curry favor with this incomparably huge thigh. Old Ma walked into the inner room, opened one of the rooms, and said, you can stay here for now. When the immortal side is ready, I will arrange for you to enter the Kunlun party directly. Lu Chen nodded and said, all right. At nightfall, Kunwa's city gradually quieted down. The night breeze swept by and the lights of tens of thousands of households were lit. In an inconspicuous corner of the city, in a small house in a shabby alley, Old Ma and Lu Chen moved a small table and placed it in the courtyard. Then they each sat on a stool, brought a pot of wine, 2 cups, and 3 plates of side dishes, and chatted in the courtyard. A cold moon hung high in the night sky, its faint light sprinkling down, bestowing the small courtyard with a bit of light. However, under the eaves of the surrounding houses, there was only darkness. In the shadows, like a ghost, Atsu poked its head out of the dark corner of the corridor and carefully looked around. Then it wagged its tail and sniffed around the small courtyard before sneaking to a corner to pee. Only then did it run back to Lu Chen's side, stretched its body, and lay down at Lu Chen's feet. Lu Chen casually picked up a chicken foot from the plate and tossed it over. Atsu didn't even get up. It just stretched its neck forward and caught it in one bite. Then it leaned against Lu Chen's feet and began to happily chew on it. Old Ma glanced at Atsu and said, when you go up the mountain in a few days, what about this black dog? Lu Chen picked up the wine pot and poured some wine into his cup. He said, I'll leave it with you for now. Once I settle down at the Kunlun party, I'll see if I can bring it up the mountain. Old Ma rolled his eyes and said, the spirited mountain of Kunlun is the world's #1 paradise. There are all kinds of celestial and auspicious beasts on the mountain. How can you bring a lame dog up there? Lu Chen rubbed his chin and said thoughtfully, now that you mention it, I suddenly remember that when I was risking my life outside in the past, when I was in danger at the gates of hell, I had eaten quite a lot of the flesh and blood of the various demonic beasts. Only these legendary spiritual beasts of the immortals have never been seen before. Old Ma's face darkened. He glared at Lu Chen and said, hey, you haven't even gone up the mountain and you're already thinking about whether the meat of the spiritual beasts on the mountain tastes good or not. That's not very good. Lu Chen smiled and said, I was just thinking about it. Old Ma looked at him suspiciously and said, but why do I feel like you're up to no good? TSK, what a villain. Lu Chen threw away the topic disdainfully and said, how's the current situation in the Kunlun party? Tell me about it. Old Ma nodded and said, now the huge Kunlun mountain range is already under the control of the Kunlun party. The spirited mountain range is continuous and undulating. Over the past thousands of years, countless immortal caves have been opened. But the most important place is the so-called spring, summer, autumn, and winter peaks between the sky and clouds. They are in the depths of Kunlun and are suspended above the mountains. They are the world's #1 wonders. Legend has it that they were created by the fall of a star 5,000 years ago. Lu Chen nodded and said, I've also heard of the 4 floating peaks between the sky and clouds. Although I haven't seen them with my own eyes, I think they must be amazing wonders. Old Ma said, not only that, it is said that the spiritual power on the 4 floating peaks is more than 10 times that of the mortal world. It is a natural holy land for cultivation. In the Kunlun party, except for the 2 perfected deity transformation, it is said that only Yuanying Zhenren is qualified to set foot on these 4 strange peaks. Lu Chen raised his glass and clinked it with Old Ma's. He said with a smile, I wonder if we will have the chance to go up and see in the future? Old Ma shrugged and said with a smile, I think we will have the chance to stand on the ground and look up for a few times. Lu Chen laughed and drank the wine in his glass. Then he said, "Tell me about those sections." Old Ma pondered for a moment and said, "Nowadays, there are many heroes in the cultivation world. Although the Kunlun party can't be said to be second to none, it is still one of the top 5 sections. There are indeed many heroes in the sect. However, after you enter the sect in the future, you still have to pay attention to one thing." At this point, his voice slightly lowered. He said, "The Kunlun party has been passed down to this day, and its orthodoxy has never been broken. However, there were 2 founders in the past, Kun Yuanzi and Tai Luo. Therefore, the orthodoxy that has been passed down over the years is actually divided into 2 factions. One is called Kuanji, and the other is called Tieji." Lu Chen frowned and said, "Why, these 2 factions don't get along?" Old Ma said, "They are harmonious on the surface, but not on the inside." Lu Chen nodded and said, "Could it be that they are secretly scheming against each other?" "Not at all." Old Ma smiled and said lightly. Lu Chen was startled for a moment, then he said with a smile, "Oh, this is strange." Old Ma said, "There is nothing strange about it, because the Tieji branch of the Kunlun party has been on the decline for many years. On the contrary, the Kuanji branch is growing stronger day by day. The 2 great perfected gods of the current Kunlun party, Tianlan and Bai Chen, are both from the Kuanji branch. Among the 19 Yuanyin perfected ones, 15 are from the Kuanji branch. What do you think?" Lu Chen said, "Oh, I see. No wonder the Tieji branch wants to tuck their tails between their legs." Old Ma laughed and said, "Who says it isn't? Originally, the Kuanji and Tieji legacies were divided equally among the spirited mountain of Kunlun. Not to mention other things, just the 4 strange peaks in the sky and clouds were 2 on each side. But now perfected Lord Tianlan has 1, Hakushin Jinkuan has 1, and the remaining 2 have been occupied by the 15 Yuanyin perfected ones. If you were a disciple of the Tieji branch, what would you do?" Lu Chen thought for a moment, then said with a smile, "Why not rebel?" Chapter 83. Old Ma spat and looked at Lu Chen with disdain. He said, "Do you think you can rebel just because you say so? It's easy for you to say that." Lu Chen laughed and poured wine into their glasses again. He said, "Then what do you think we should do?" Old Ma said sternly, "If I were a disciple of Tai Ji's lineage, I wouldn't be able to defeat the Kun Ji who have the advantage in numbers. Then I might as well admit defeat and behave myself. Besides, the 2 of us are saying alarmist words here. In fact, in the Kunlun party, the 2 groups of disciples may not really be like fire and water. No matter what, they are still Kunlun disciples of the same sect and ancestor. They just have some disputes on ordinary days. How big of a deal can it be?" Lu Chen thought for a moment, then said, What you said makes sense. Perhaps in another 200 or 300 years, the tables will turn. At that time, the iron branch's strength will suddenly soar, suppressing the Kuanji branch." Old Ma laughed and said, "Isn't that so? Who knows what will happen in the future? Let's drink, let's drink." The 2 of them clinked their glasses and made a crisp sound. The black dog lying under the table looked up and then lowered its head to gnaw on the bone. Old Ma glanced at Lu Chen and said with a smile, "Speaking of which, in a few days, I may go up the mountain to become a Kunlun disciple. At that time, everything will naturally be arranged by that person. I think he will not treat you too badly. Oh yes, as a disciple, it doesn't matter which branch you belong to. The most important thing is to be well informed and convenient." Lu Chen interrupted Old Ma's speech and said, "You go tell the damn Baldy that I want to be in Kuanji. If he dares to put me in Tieji, I will kill his oxen." Pfft. Cough, cough, cough. Old Ma suddenly choked and coughed on the spot. There are a lot of influential clans in Kunwa City, and most of them are the descendants of experts who have achieved the Dao in the Kunlun party for several thousand years. They have been passed down from generation to generation, and they are inextricably linked to the Kunlun party. Old Ma pointed to the north and said, "These big families and clans have 2 biggest advantages. First, they follow the Kunlun party wholeheartedly and become its claws, teeth, and eyes. I don't dare to say far away, but within a radius of 2,000 miles from Kunwa City, nothing can escape the Kunlun party's grasp. Second, over the years, almost all the outstanding talents in these big families and clans have entered the Kunlun party's tutelage, and many outstanding talents have emerged from them. Lu Chen nodded. Suddenly, he frowned and said, according to you, we can't hide from the Kunlun party's spies even if we come here? Old Ma snorted and proudly said, that's only for ordinary people. What kind of person am I, old Ma Xiaoyun? No one can recognize me no matter what I do, not to mention that I have that person secretly watching over me. Don't worry, it'll be fine. Lu Chen laughed and said, in any case, it's those children of influential clans who are powerful, right? We can't afford to offend them. Old Ma rolled his eyes and said, bullshit. At the end of the day, you brat, there's someone standing behind you, supporting you. Until now, that person still doesn't have a disciple, but he has an exceedingly powerful peerless divine ability. If you really shed all pretense of cordiality with him, even if all the influential families in Kunwa City joined hands, none of them would dare to oppose you. Lu Chen laughed and said, unfortunately, I can't have a falling out with him, so I can only endure, right? Old Ma sternly said, that's right. Then aren't you talking nonsense? I'm not talking nonsense. Old Ma solemnly said, while you're suppressing your resentment, you can think to yourself, when I'm done with my business in the future, I'll come and settle the score with you. Let's see if you idiots, who look down on others, will kneel in front of me at that time. Lu Chen couldn't help but laugh and said, you're really thinking too far ahead. Old Ma laughed mischievously and said, of course. All these years, I've been so angry at you that my life has been shortened by 10 years. Every time, didn't I secretly think like this to get through it? Lu Chen extended a finger to him to show his respect, then he casually said, nowadays, in the Kunlun party, who has a deep background and can't be provoked? Tell me all of them. In the future, I'll stay away from them. Old Ma thought for a moment then said, right now, you have the air of a useless person on your face. At most, you're only at the Qi refining realm. The Kunlun party is so big, and there are at least 80 to 90,000 people with higher cultivation than you. It seems like you can't provoke any of them. Lu Chen, Old Ma said again, oh, but of course, there are some who are especially powerful. You especially can't provoke them. Everyone, people as powerful as spiritual master Yuanying and Jin Dan Friar can crush you with a finger. Their direct disciples are almost all elite disciples, so you should also stay away from them. As for the disciples of the aristocratic families, although there are many Kunwu aristocratic families, there will always be ups and downs. Right now, the most powerful families are probably the Bai, Tai, and Su clans. You should give in to them. As for the small aristocratic families that have declined, they actually don't matter. Lu Chen suddenly thought of something and asked, is there an aristocratic family with the surname Yi in this city? How strong is it? Yi clan? Old Ma thought for a moment then said, it's all right. These years, I haven't heard of any powerful figures emerging from this family. It can't be considered one of the most powerful families, but it can't be said to have declined either. It can be considered average. Why are you asking about it? Lu Chen said, oh, it's nothing. I've seen a girl from this family before. He then told Old Ma about how he met Yi Xian in the land of chaos. Old Ma frowned and said, why didn't you tell her about this? Lu Chen said indifferently, what would happen if I told her? Old Ma didn't hesitate at all and said, of course, I'd think of a way to avoid this flaw and not let her get in the way. Halfway through his sentence, Old Ma's voice suddenly dropped and his expression changed slightly. He glanced at Lu Chen, shook his head, and sighed softly. He didn't say anything else. Lu Chen smiled and said, yes, don't let her get in the way. He lowered his head and looked at the wine cup in his hand. The amber wine trembled slightly in the cup. After a while, he raised the cup and drank the wine. As the days passed, Lu Chen quietly stayed in the small courtyard. It could be said that he didn't go out at all. Fatty Old Ma went out a few times. He came and went in a hurry, and no one knew what he was busy with. Even Black Dog sneaked out to stroll in the alley outside, but he quickly ran back. When he was bored, Lu Chen would sit behind the counter in the front hall when Old Ma went out. He said that he was helping Old Ma look after the shop. However, he soon realized how accurate his previous judgment was. For a whole 7 days, he didn't see a single customer come to the Black Hill Pavilion. On the morning of the 8th day, Old Ma very seriously told Lu Chen that there should be some progress in helping him infiltrate the Kunlun party, and he would go out to do it. So, Lu Chen sat quietly behind the lonely counter and looked out the door at the quiet alley. Atsu lay directly in front of the door, enjoying the passing wind from the alley. Its tail wagged from time to time, as if it was enjoying its dog life. Suddenly, there was a sudden sound of footsteps coming from the bluestone road in the alley outside. After a moment, a clear and melodious voice, like a wind chime gently swaying in the spring breeze, came from outside. Black Hill Pavilion. What a strange name. Chapter 84. The black dog suddenly pricked up its ears, then suddenly jumped up and stared at the door with its eyes shining. It bared its sharp fangs and let out a low growl from its throat, looking like it was about to bite someone. There was an exclamation from outside the house, but a moment later, a figure suddenly appeared at the door. It was Lu Chen. Lu Chen kicked the stupid dog to the ground and scolded, "Stupid dog. This is a guest. If you want to eat meat and bones in the future, you will have to rely on him. Do you want to die? Woo woo." The low and fierce growl suddenly changed, and the ferocious aura on the black dog disappeared in the blink of an eye. It wagged its tail wildly and hummed in a low voice. It ran out of the door and circled the figure outside the door twice, shaking its head and wagging its tail without any integrity to speak of. Ah. Yeah. The person outside the house was shocked at first, then let out a sound of, huh, but then burst out laughing. She covered her mouth and laughed. Why is this dog so fun? Lu Chen looked up and saw a young girl about 10 years old standing on the bluestone road outside the house. She had almond-shaped eyes and peach cheeks, and her skin was as white as snow. Although she had not grown up yet, from the looks of it, she would definitely be a stunning beauty in the future. At this moment, the little girl looked at the black dog jumping around beside her. She seemed to find it very interesting, and she was full of smiles. There was a soft breeze blowing through the alley, and her red sleeves fluttered in the wind. At this moment, the spring breeze, the deep alley, and the young girl, this scene was like a beautiful painting. Lu Chen called out to the stupid dog that was jumping around blindly. Then, his gaze fell on the girl's face, and he couldn't help but sigh in admiration in his heart. Although the girl in front of him wasn't very old, her complexion was truly the first time he'd seen someone with such a complexion. It could be said that she was born with a beauty that could cause the downfall of nations and people since she was young. "Miss, what's the matter?" Lu Chen asked the little girl politely, and at the same time, glanced into the distance of the alley. There was no one in the alley. She seemed to have come alone. The girl pointed at the signboard with the words, Black Hill Pavilion, and asked, "Is this a shop?" Lu Chen was startled for a moment, then he turned around and said, "I guess so." The girl nodded with a smile and walked in. At the same time, a pair of bright and clear eyes looked at the simple things in the shop. She was a little curious and a little cautious. Lu Chen walked back to the counter and asked, "What do you want to buy?" "Yes." The young lady responded, but she didn't speak immediately. Instead, she glanced at the row of shelves behind the counter. There were some items on the shelves inside the store. Most of them were the most common spirit materials. They looked like they had been there for a long time because many places were covered in dust. After noticing that the girl's gaze had become a little strange, Lu Chen also turned around to look. When the scene on the shelves fell into his eyes, Lu Chen was also stunned for a moment. Then he turned around and smiled a little awkwardly, saying, "The owner of this shop is very lazy, I've let you see a joke." "Hey, are you not the shopkeeper of this Black Hill Pavilion?" The girl asked with some surprise and looked around. In this shop, it was obvious that only Lu Chen was looking after the shop. I'm not the shopkeeper here. Lu Chen said seriously, in fact, I am the uncle of the shopkeeper. Today, he went out to buy goods, so I came to help look after the shop. Oh, I see. The girl nodded as if she believed him. However, when she looked at the simple appearance of the shop, her face gradually revealed a difficult expression. Lu Chen asked with a smile, what do you need? Tell me. If there is, I will show it to you. If there isn't, then there's nothing I can do. Anyways, I can't force you to buy or sell in broad daylight, right? The girl smiled again. At that moment, the beauty of the girl hit him in the face, like the clear sky after a storm. There was a refreshing atmosphere. I want to buy some Cangju Zi. Lu Chen nodded and said, Cangju Zi, wait, let me see if there is any. Okay. The girl smiled. Lu Chen searched the shelves and finally found this relatively common spirit material in a shelf. He put it on the counter and said, there really is. If it was anything else, I wouldn't give it to you. But this spirit material, Cangju Zi, is taken from the seed. There is a hard shell on the outside and it will not spoil after 10 years. You should be able to use it. The girl thought about it and nodded. Yes, that is true. My master also said so. Alright then, I'll buy 10. Okay. Lu Chen picked out 10 Cangju Zi that looked good. He found a cloth and wiped them clean. Then, he wrapped them in paper and handed them to the girl. The girl smiled sweetly and took the paper bag. As she put it away, she reached into her pocket and said, how much, ah? Suddenly, she exclaimed and her expression changed. It was as if she was stunned. Lu Chen looked at her and said, what is it? The girl's cheeks flushed red. Her skin looked white and rosy, adding to her beauty. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She said, I seem to have forgotten to bring money. Oh, I see. Lu Chen sighed. This business was too difficult. There was hesitation on the girl's face. After a moment, she said awkwardly to Lu Chen, Uncle, I have an urgent need for this Cangju Zi. Can I take it first? I will have someone send the money later. Halfway through her words, she suddenly found that Lu Chen was staring at her with a strange expression. She couldn't help but lower her voice. A moment later, she couldn't help but ask, can't I? Lu Chen coughed and didn't answer. He asked instead, what did you call me just now? The girl stilled and said, Uncle, you are so old, you are the uncle of the shopkeeper here. Oh, okay. Lu Chen shook his head and then said seriously to the girl, no, you cannot owe money for the goods. The girl was shocked. She seemed to want to say something but her face seemed to become even redder. She said in a low voice, I am not that kind of person. I said I will return it, I will definitely return it. That grace of lowering her head was enough to intoxicate people without drinking. Her watery eyes were enough to make the world fall for her. Lu Chen shook his head and said, you can't. The girl looked sadly at him and could only put the paper bag in her hand back on the counter. Then she turned and walked out. Just as she was about to reach the door, Lu Chen's voice suddenly came from behind her. Hey! Your money bag is gone. The girl's footsteps suddenly stopped. Looking back, she saw that Lu Chen had walked out from behind the counter. At the same time, he was holding a small red bag with a flower embroidered with gold thread. Ah! I was wondering where the money bag went. The girl's beautiful eyes widened and she quickly walked over. She said with a giggle and then reached out to Lu Chen. Lu Chen let her grab the small bag but he didn't let go. The girl pulled and was somewhat surprised. She looked at Lu Chen and said, Uncle, why don't you let go? Lu Chen said, I can return the money bag to you, but you should also return the Cangju Zi in your sleeve to me. As he spoke, he didn't look at the girl's suddenly stiff smile. He sighed and said, also, don't call me uncle. It sounds weird. Chapter 85. The girl tugged at the pouch twice, but found that Lu Chen's grip was exceptionally firm, and she couldn't pull it back. After her expression changed, the gentleness and carefulness on her face suddenly disappeared, and was replaced by a kind of annoyance. With a snort, her other hand suddenly raised, and a paper bag actually flew out from her sleeve, smashing towards Lu Chen's face. Lu Chen reached out to catch it, and casually grabbed it with his hand, then nodded and let go. The girl took a step back, and first hid the small bag in her bosom, then looked up and down at Lu Chen, coldly snorted, and said, "I can't tell, you actually know such despicable methods." Lu Chen laughed, and said, "I used to rely on this to make a living." As he said that, his gaze fell on the girl's exceptionally beautiful face, and he frowned, saying, "Little girl, since you have such a beautiful appearance, why can't you do anything? Do you really have to do this? Don't blame me for not warning you, these despicable people are not good. With your beautiful face, if you aren't careful, I'm afraid you'll be eaten alive." Oh. The girl didn't look old, only about 10 years old, but at this moment, after removing her disguise, her body suddenly had an additional mature aura. Her young face revealed a disdainful look, and she looked at Lu Chen, saying, "So, you are still a good person?" Lu Chen said, "I can't say that I'm a good person, but it's not bad to remind you, what do you think?" "Che." The girl sneered, and said, "You're just saying it casually. Less nonsense, do you have anything else? If not, I'm leaving." This swindler was actually so self-righteous, as if not stealing from Lu Chen, but Lu Chen's fault. Lu Chen also couldn't help but laugh, but first, this girl was really too young, and second, her face was already very beautiful at such a young age, it really made people unable to harden their hearts to do anything. He immediately waved his hand, and said, "You can leave, anyway, next time you're caught, I won't be so polite. This broken shop, I'm not just passing by, even if you pay me money, I won't come again." The girl angrily shouted, then turned around and walked out of the door. The black dog next to her wagged its tail and came over, jumping enthusiastically beside the girl. The girl looked at the black dog, and especially saw the lame Atsu's hind legs. She was first startled, but then her eyes became slightly soft, and she reached out her hand to touch the head of the Atsu, and said, "This dog is much cuter than your master." The Atsu tilted its head, and stuck out its tongue, and looked affectionate. Suddenly, Lu Chen from behind, and said, "Atsu. That's a bad guy, he wants to steal our things." The Atsu didn't seem to react for a moment, and blankly looked back at Lu Chen. Lu Chen sternly said, "Be fierce to her. Bite her." Atsu jumped up, as if he had suddenly come to his senses. Immediately, the hair on his neck stood up, and he let out a low growl, baring his fangs at the young girl. He looked like a hungry wolf, ready to pounce and bite someone in the next moment. "Ah!" The girl was shocked, and suddenly jumped away as if she was electrocuted. She quickly ran out of the door, and then cursed at the shop, a house full of monsters, bad people, and stupid dogs. Woof 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 woof, as the Atsu roared, it suddenly rushed out. The girl screamed and ran away. Her speed was extremely fast, and in the blink of an eye, she ran out of the alley. The Atsu chased a step, but was stopped by Lu Chen from behind, and then turned back bitterly. But then it seemed to be happy again, and quite proud. It circled around Lu Chen a few times, and kept barking, as if it wanted to take credit. Lu Chen sighed, looked at it, squatted down, and grabbed the head of the Atsu in front of his eyes, pulled its ears, and scratched the dog's fur. After looking left and right, he frowned and said, "Strange, I remember that snow wolves and black jackals are intelligent and cunning monsters. Why do you always look stupid? Woof woof, woof woof." The Atsu stuck out half of its tongue and licked Lu Chen, and looked very happy. In the evening, old Ma came back. As soon as he entered the house, he pulled Lu Chen to close the door and went to the backyard. Then he said with a smile, "It's finally done." Lu Chen nodded and said, "That's good. When do we go up the mountain?" Old Ma said, "In 3 days. A few days ago, the Kunlun party just held the annual Immortal Appraisal meeting, and they accepted a new batch of disciples. Recently, it's the time for those who have no chance to officially join the sect to display their supernatural powers. You're not conspicuous at all among them. Lu Chen looked at him, and said with a smile, "What do you mean by displaying their supernatural powers?" Old Ma laughed, and said in a low voice, "On the surface, the Kunlun party wants to accept so many disciples, but in fact, there are a lot of people who want to squeeze their own children into the sect. Don't tell me you don't know about this." Lu Chen shrugged and said, "From what you said, there are quite a lot of disciples like me who sneak into the sect in a roundabout way." Old Ma said with a smile, "Of course. The Immortal Appraisal meeting has accepted 500 people, and they can at least squeeze another 200 or 300 in." Damn! Lu Chen was shocked, and said, "There are so many." Old Ma snorted, and said, "The more they accept, the more spirit stones they can collect. This business is better than anything else." Lu Chen said with emotion, "You're right." At night, 2 people and a dog sat in the small courtyard again. Old Ma took a sip of wine, and said to Lu Chen with a frown, "You let that little girl go just like that?" Lu Chen said helplessly, "What else can I do? I can't really detain her, can I?" Old Ma thought for a while, and said, "At least you should ask about her identity, background, and name, right?" Lu Chen shook his head, and said, "It's useless to ask. It's all fake." Old Ma clicked his tongue, and his eyes suddenly became a little strange. He looked at Lu Chen, and said, "Speaking of which, why didn't I notice that you have this trick before? I didn't see you learn it from that person." Lu Chen smiled, picked up a cup of wine, and lightly said, "That was before I met him. I was muddling around in this city, trying to survive. Aside from picking up trash, I also learned how to steal and swindle people." Old Ma was stunned, and looked at Lu Chen for a long time without saying anything. After a long time, he said in a low voice, "It's not easy to be a lowly person. You were so young back then. Did you suffer a lot?" "Yes." Listening to Lu Chen's extremely simple answer, Old Ma didn't know what to say for a moment. After a while, he laughed dryly and changed the topic, and said, That little girl is really unlucky. She happened to pass by here and wanted to do some business, but she actually met an expert. She must have been half dead with anger, no?" Lu Chen suddenly interrupted Old Ma. Old Ma was startled, and said, "What's wrong?" Lu Chen smiled, and then he gazed at the cold and dark night sky in the distance. After that, he took a sip of wine and said, "All those years ago, when I did all these things that harmed people, I'd always checked and calculated carefully, and there was no such thing as a coincidence. As for whether she happened to pass by, I don't know." Chapter 86. What should we do? Old Ma furrowed his brows in distress and said, "It feels a little troublesome." Lu Chen glanced at him and said, "Maybe they aren't here for me." Old Ma was stunned and said, "Then who are they here for?" "You." Lu Chen looked at Old Ma's fat face and said seriously, "To be able to open a shop in such a desolate alley, he must be a fat sheep that is easily deceived. I think that's what that little girl is thinking. Get lost." Old Ma scolded angrily and then took out a book as thick as a finger and threw it at him. Lu Chen caught it and flipped it open to take a look. At the same time, he asked, "What is this?" Some of the most famous people in the Kunlun sect, the young geniuses of the younger generation, the children of the aristocratic families with deep backgrounds, and some people with eccentric temperament and behavior. Brief information about them, including Dao techniques, magical treasures, and so on, are all written on it. In addition, there are also some situations in the Kunlun party's main halls. You can take a look when you have time. After you have written it down, burn this book." Lu Chen was silent for a long time. The joking expression on his face disappeared and he sat up straight. Then, with a serious expression, he said to Old Ma, "Thank you for your hard work." Old Ma grinned and said, "This kind of thing should be shown to people who understand. Only then will it be satisfying." Lu Chen sighed and said to him, with this kind of ability, you can actually do a lot of big things. It's a bit of a disadvantage to hang around with people like me. Old Ma said, in this world, is there anything bigger than what you want to do? Lu Chen sneered and put away the book. Then, he picked up the wine pot and poured wine for Old Ma and himself. At the same time, he asked, about the person we are looking for, what do you know? Old Ma shook his head and said, I have no clue. We do not know anything about that person, whether he is a man or a woman, whether he is old or young, whether his cultivation level is high or low. Other than knowing that he is hiding in the Kunlun party to do something big, we do not know anything else. Lu Chen raised his cup and clinked it with Old Ma's, then drained it in one gulp and said, take your time to find it. 3 days later, Lu Chen went to the Kunlun mountain and joined the Kunlun party, becoming a Kunlun disciple that was envied by most mortals. This was a layer of dazzling halo, like a gilded and dazzling coat, draped over his body. To outsiders, it looked so glorious, except for the insiders who were also on Kunlun mountain. Just as Old Ma had said before, although the Kunlun sect, which had a history of 5,000 years, usually paid the most attention to rules and integrity, after so many years, the persistence passed down by the founding master was still flexible. Apart from the 500 new disciples who were officially accepted during the Grand Immortal Appraisal meeting, Kunlun sect had secretly added another 250 people into the sect. Lu Chen was one of them. Unfortunately, his innate aptitude was considered to be the worst among all of them. In the cultivation world, talent were based on the 5 elements will in the dantian of the Sea of Qi. The more divine pillars, the higher the talent. Generally speaking, only disciples who had at least 2 5 elements divine pillars would be accepted by famous sects like the Kunlun party. The hope of a first pillar disciple was too small, and the loss outweighed the gain by placing spiritual materials and resources on such a person. Yes, Lu Chen was the kind of person that the loss outweighed the gain, but this kind of person was not rare in the Kunlun mountain, because who did not have the dream of becoming an immortal? No matter how bad one's talent was, there was always a little hope. Besides, even if there was no hope of becoming an immortal, if one could get some opportunities in the Kunlun mountain and practice some magic, not only would one's strength increase greatly, one's life would also be extended a lot. Why not? This kind of thinking was naturally human nature. As for the high and mighty elders of the Kunlun sect, it was impossible for them to care about these small matters. Who didn't have a close relationship with someone? Furthermore, it wasn't like they were sent in for free. Therefore, in such a bright and slightly gray background, Lu Chen safely and calmly entered the Kunlun party, without attracting anyone's attention, and became a servant disciple with the lowest position in the Kunlun party. However, since he was of the lowest position, the Kunlun party would not keep idle people, so Lu Chen was quickly arranged to go to the Baichao Tang of the Kunlun party, and like the many other servant disciples, he grew all kinds of spiritual herbs for the Kunlun party. The majestic Kunlun was the first famous mountain in the western land. From a distance, one could only see the majestic peaks rising and falling, and the clouds were like waves. In the deepest part of the huge mountain range, the clouds gathered like a vast ocean, and as far as the eye could see, one could vaguely see the 4 faintly discernible figures of strange peaks floating high above the clouds. It could be said to be a magical place that seized all the creation of heaven and earth. However, this kind of immortal spiritual land, historically, only the most elite part of the Kunlun party could set foot in it. Ordinary servant disciples did not even have the qualification to go near it. In the blink of an eye, Lu Chen had already entered the Kunlun party for a month. Over the past month, he was no different from the people around him. Everyone woke up early and slept late every day, working hard for the spiritual herbs in the Kunlun immortal family's spiritual fields, hoping that one day they could get a lucky chance and stand out from the crowd. There were many servant disciples in the Kunlun party. It was said that among the 100,000 disciples, perhaps 60 to 70,000 were such people. To some extent, it was the hard work of the countless common people at the foot of the mountain and the many servant disciples on the mountain that supported a small part of the elites of the Kunlun party. As for the Baichao Tang, after Lu Chen came here, he was given a spiritual field of 1 mu, so that he could plant spiritual herbs. Every time it was harvest time, he had to hand in a fixed amount of harvest, and then he would be considered to have completed his task. If he did not hand in enough, he would be punished, and if he had an extra harvest, he would be rewarded. Most of the servant disciples relied on these extra harvests that they had worked hard to obtain in exchange for a little hope of standing out in the future. Hope was the most beautiful thing, was it not? For most people, it was, but for Lu Chen, it was not. He quietly lived in the Kunlun party, and then quietly observed the giant Kunlun party in the shadows of the crowd. After slowly familiarizing himself with the situation here, he also began to touch the things he wanted little by little. Of course, that mysterious devil cult spy was still nowhere to be found. But in this month, Lu Chen had already learned some things. For example, the two supremes of the Kunlun party, Hakushin Jinkuan, was in closed-door training on the mountain peak among the clouds all year round, while Supremes Tianlan went to the immortal city of Zhengxianmeng, and seemed to be very busy. This year, the Kunlun party had accepted more than 700 new disciples. Fortunately, there were many talented newcomers, but those were phoenixes that flew up the branches, and had almost no interaction with sparrows like Lu Chen. And Hong Chuan, whom he had met before, had indeed left the Kunlun mountain a few days ago. It was said that he had gone to the distant northern region to hone his state of mind and cultivation. When Lu Chen heard the news, he sighed for that friend in his heart. But very soon, he thought that he would be very quiet and would be dormant for a very long time in the Kunlun mountain, but suddenly there were waves. It was one afternoon a month after he went up the mountain. At the edge of the forest where his spiritual field was located, he once again saw a familiar person coming out of the forest. It was Yi Xian. That day, Yi Xian's face seemed a little pale. Although her face was still so beautiful, she seemed to be a little absent-minded and did not notice that among the many servant disciples working in the spiritual field not far away, there was Lu Chen. Lu Chen quietly turned around, thinking that Kunlun Mountain was so big, if he missed it today, he might as well not see it again in the future. Trouble. Then, he suddenly heard a scream coming from behind. The voice was sharp, and for some reason, it suddenly reminded him of the journey in the land of chaos. Lu Chen shook his head and sighed, thinking that it was troublesome. Chapter 87. Lu Chen's initial reaction was to turn around and leave. He was prepared to quietly avoid her. After all, Kunlun Mountain was so big and Yi Xian did not seem to have seen him. If he missed this chance, he might not see her again in the future. But the scream that followed was indeed a little frightening. It was as if Yi Xian had suddenly seen the most terrifying thing in the world. Her scream was heart-wrenching. Lu Chen stopped in his tracks, feeling a little helpless. At that moment, his mind replayed the journey with Yi Xian in the land of chaos from beginning to end. He muttered, "It can't be. I don't remember doing anything to you. Are you so afraid to see me?" But when he turned his head to look in the direction of Yi Xian, he suddenly frowned. He saw that when Yi Xian walked out of the forest, a figure suddenly ran out from behind her and grabbed her hand. When the figure that appeared from behind appeared in everyone's line of sight, it immediately caused a commotion among the crowd of odd-job disciples who had slowly gathered to watch the show. Even the usually calm Lu Chen's expression changed slightly. At the same time, he instantly understood why Yi Xian would let out such a tragic scream. It was a man wearing the Kunlun party disciple uniform. But his face was completely destroyed. At least a dozen shocking scars remained on his face. His facial features were terrible. One of his ears was missing, his nose was gone, and there was a big cut on his chin. A terrible scar had slashed across his left eye, leaving a pitted red flesh. It seemed that this eyeball had also been destroyed. This face looked like it had been slashed countless times by a sharp blade, or had been ruthlessly gnawed on by a terrifying beast. It was completely devoid of human form. It was hard to imagine that a person who had suffered such serious injuries could actually survive that disaster. At this moment, it was a bright and sunny day. Under the bright sky, the surrounding people all felt a trace of coldness, and a few timid female disciples even closed their eyes and looked away, not daring to look directly at that person. The terrifying face that resembled a demon from hell suddenly appeared behind Xian. After grabbing her, the face leaned in and let out a deep, furious growl. When she lifted her eyes, the face was already inches away from her. No wonder she let out such a shrill scream. "Let me go! Let me go!" However, to Lu Chen's surprise, Xian did not faint from fright. Instead, she screamed in horror and struggled with all her might, trying to break free from the monstrous man's grasp. At the same time, she cried out repeatedly, "Shut up!" The man with the terrifying face let out a low roar, but that did not calm Xian down. Instead, she struggled even more intensely. This scene was seen by the surrounding people, and there was a sudden uproar. A beautiful girl was being bullied by such a monster. No one could stand it. Suddenly, 7 or 8 people from the side came over and shouted to stop it. Lu Chen also took 2 steps forward. No matter what, he had some friendship with Xian. At the same time, he also had some doubts in his heart. After joining the Kunlun party for a month, he had gradually learned a little about this famous sect. Although it was not as perfect as the legend said, the Kunlun party was still a place that followed rules. In general, it was impossible for there to be any public bullying on the Kunlun mountain. However, the scene in front of him was obviously not right. Just when Lu Chen was hesitating whether he should go forward to help, he suddenly heard Xian's voice crying, "Let go, Senior He. I beg you, don't do this." Lu Chen's body trembled. He immediately focused his attention and looked towards that man. As expected, when he looked carefully, he could vaguely make out a little of that handsome Kunlun disciple's appearance that he had met in Crescent City that day from that little bit of residual outline. He gang. Didn't he already die on the Black Armor Mountain in the Land of Chaos? On that day, the scene of a large group of terrible black jackals swarming on the Black Armor Mountain was still fresh in Lu Chen's memory. Then, when he looked at He Gang's face again, those clear and terrifying scars that seemed to have been left behind by sharp claws and terrifying beast teeth, Lu Chen couldn't help but feel a slight chill in his heart. Xian was crying and shouting in panic. The odd job disciples next to her obviously did not know He Gang, so they surrounded him with righteous indignation. But He Gang also seemed to be very emotional and strange. Under the crowd's gaze, he did not have the slightest intention of retreating, and even glared at the people around him with terrible anger. Seeing that the scene suddenly became tense and on the verge of breaking out, suddenly, a loud shout came from behind the crowd. "Stop, what do you want?" This shout was full of momentum, and the tone was loud, instantly suppressing all the other voices. After a moment, a tall man walked quickly to the center. He first glanced at He Gang and Xian, and his face slightly darkened, but he did not lose his temper. Then he turned to look at the crowd around him, frowned, and said in a deep voice, "Back off. What are you doing here? Do you want to rebel?" Lu Chen stood in the crowd and glanced at this person. Seeing that he had thick eyebrows and a square face, he was a disciple of the Kunlun party's Bai Chao Tang, who was sent to manage the spiritual field. His name was Zhou Kuei. After all, almost all the odd job disciples were newcomers who knew nothing about cultivation, and planting spiritual fields still needed some tricks, so Bai Chao Tang would often send some disciples down. About every 100 odd job disciples would have an official disciple in charge, and at the same time, they would teach the tricks of planting and some of the most basic cultivation methods. Zhou Kuei was such a person. Those who could get such a job were basically in the foundation realm, so in the Kunlun party, he could also be regarded as an elite disciple who had reached a higher level. Usually, the odd job disciples naturally respected Zhou Kuei very much. Although they only called him senior brother, in reality, his position was like a teacher and a father, and they did not dare to disobey him easily. But today's scene was really infuriating, and a bold person in the crowd shouted loudly, "Senior brother Zhou, it's not that we want to cause trouble, but that person is bullying our junior sister in broad daylight." Zhou Kuei's face was as dark as water. He slowly turned around and glanced at He Gang's hand that was still tightly gripping Xian's wrist. He snorted and said, "Junior brother He, you're not doing this right?" Facing this Bai Chao Tang disciple Zhou Kuei, whose cultivation was in the foundation realm, Gang's imposing manner was obviously weaker, but he still raised his head and shouted through gritted teeth, I didn't do anything, I just wanted to chat with junior sister E. What did I do wrong? Zhou Kuei's gaze fell on Xian's pretty but tear-stained face. A trace of sympathy seemed to flash across his eyes, but he still sighed and said, Junior sister E, is it like this? Xian struggled with all her might, perhaps because Zhou Kuei was right beside her. Gang finally did not dare to use force anymore, letting her withdraw her arm, but there was already an obvious red mark on her wrist. Then, Xian glanced at Zhou Kuei, a complicated expression flashed across her face, like fear, regret, and also like she was at a loss. In the end, she slowly lowered her head and softly replied, yes. The odd-job disciples in the crowd immediately burst into an uproar. Everyone had a look of surprise on their faces, and Lu Chen in the crowd frowned, looking deeply at Xian. Chapter 88. The wide spiritual field that everyone was currently in was actually a flat and wide valley in the Kunlun mountain range. It was surrounded by mountains, and in the middle was a rare expanse of flat land that was rich in spiritual energy and fertile. It was a very important production area for the Kunlun party's Baichao Tang. Due to the fact that the largest mountain next to it was the Rock Mountain, this valley basin was named the Rock Mountain Valley. At this moment, the warm sunlight shone down from the sky, shining on Rock Valley. The mountain wind blew through the valley from the forest, and countless spiritual plants danced in the wind, like a magnificent wave. At the edge of the forest at the foot of Rock Mountain, the atmosphere was cold and strange. Many servant disciples gathered there, looking at the young girl with her head lowered in disbelief. Xian's panicked crying didn't seem like she was just chatting in the forest. She was obviously frightened. But in the end, the victim herself said that she was fine, so what else could they do? Zhou Kuei reacted quickly. He turned around and shouted at the servant disciples, okay. Didn't you see that junior sister E said that she was fine? What are you still doing here? Go back to work. Many janitor disciples looked at each other in dismay. Most of the new disciples were young and full of vigor. However, everyone knew that there might be some inside story behind this situation. So, under the whispers and strange gazes, the crowd slowly dispersed. After Zhou Kuei dispersed the crowd, he frowned at Gang and Xian at the edge of the forest. He wanted to turn around and leave with a straight face. Who knew that at this time, Xian suddenly ran a few steps towards him and said, Senior brother Zhou, I'll go with you. Zhou Kuei's body trembled slightly. Before he could say anything, Gang, who was behind him, already said loudly, Junior sister E, I still have something to say to you. Xian didn't even look at him. She looked at Zhou Kuei with pleading eyes. Zhou Kuei was silent for a moment, then nodded his head and said to Xian, okay. Xian immediately looked happy and nodded. Gang was shocked, Senior brother Zhou, what are you doing? Zhou Kuei's eyes flashed with a trace of impatience. He turned to look at Gang and frowned, Junior brother everything should be done in moderation. Besides, junior sister E has something to do with me. Are you trying to discipline me? Gang subconsciously flinched under Zhou Kuei's piercing stare. After a moment, he seemed to grit his teeth and glanced fiercely at Xian, then turned around and left without a word. As Xian watched Gang leave, she finally heaved a sigh of relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from her shoulders. Zhou Kuei saw her expression and his eyes softened. He asked softly, are you all right? Are you all right? Xian nodded silently. Zhou Kuei said, let's go. He walked forward. Xian silently followed beside him, but after walking for a while, she suddenly heard Zhou Kuei's voice, Junior sister E, you still have to think of a solution for this matter yourself. Xian raised her head to look at Zhou Kuei in a daze, only to see that Zhou Kuei was not looking at her. Instead, he was looking straight ahead, but he said in a voice that only she could hear, I have known Senior He for many years, and I know that his talent are extraordinary. Now that he is about to break through to the Golden Elixir realm, at his age, his future can be said to be limitless. He turned around with a sympathetic expression mixed with some helplessness. It doesn't matter if I help you once in a while. Senior brother He will probably just smile when he hears it. But if I help him again and again, I'm afraid he won't like it. Do you understand? Xian's face turned pale. After a while, she lowered her head and said in a low voice, I understand. At this moment, she seemed to be in a daze. Her face was as pale as paper. She seemed to be trapped in some kind of fear for the future, so much so that she didn't notice that in a spiritual field not far from them, Lu Chen was standing there thoughtfully looking at her figure. The Kunlun party was a famous sect with many rules. But after so many years, it wasn't that it didn't care about human feelings. Living in the mountains was hard and cultivating was boring, so the sect didn't strictly forbid its disciples from leaving the mountain. Generally speaking, even if it was a part-time disciple, as long as he could guarantee to come back before the curfew, the Kunlun party's mountain gate guards wouldn't stop him. However, it was precisely because of the curfew that anyone who violated it would be severely punished. Therefore, unless they received orders from the sect to go out, most people could only stroll in Kunwa city at the foot of the mountain. However, the Kunlun mountain range was very vast. Generally, the disciples who were assigned to cultivate or work on the mountains far away from the mountain gate of the southern foothills would need several hours to reach the mountain gate if they didn't have the ability to fly fast. In fact, they wouldn't be able to go down the mountain. The Shirpan Valley where Lu Chen lived was about 2 hours away from the mountain gate of the southern foothills. It wasn't far, but it wasn't close either. As long as he could squeeze out some time, he could go to Kunwa City for a stroll. In Kunwa City, the fatty old Ma's Black Hill Pavilion was naturally the place he often went to. The remote and quiet alley was as deep and serene as before. It seemed that no matter how many years passed, there wouldn't be a single customer. Old Ma sat on the threshold with a somewhat sad expression. He sighed and said, Alas, when will there be any business? Don't think about it. Sitting behind the counter in the room, Lu Chen yawned lazily and said, Just give up. You're not cut out to do business. Old Ma spat and said indignantly, Bullshit. Your father, was born to be a genius. In the future, I'll definitely do something big and earn a fortune that can rival a country. At that time, you can just wait to kneel in front of me. Lu Chen said, Wake up. It's not dark yet. Stop dreaming. Old Ma muttered. He probably felt that it was really inappropriate to talk about ideals with this person, so he said, You've been on the mountain for a month now. How's the situation? Lu Chen shrugged and said, In the beginning, I couldn't say anything. However, this Kunlun party really has a lot of rules. It's a 5,000-year famous sect. It's not strange. Old Ma said with a smile. Then he glanced at the empty alley outside and said, By the way, I found the person you asked me to investigate last time. Lu Chen raised his eyebrows and looked over. He said, You actually found him. I've underestimated you. Old Horse had a smug look on his face as he said, Nonsense. Who do you think I am? As long as I want to investigate, there's nothing on this Kunlun mountain that I can't figure out. Lu Chen was too lazy to care about this guy's bragging. He just asked, Who is that person? Old Ma said, Moonlight cut is extremely difficult to practice. There are not many young disciples who can practice it. Moreover, it's a woman. Moreover, during that period of time, she was not on the mountain of Kunlun. After searching for a long time, there's probably only one person left. Su Qingjun, the only disciple of the Kunlun party's Masato Kihara. Chapter 89. Muyuan? Lu Chen frowned slightly. After pondering for a moment, he asked with a strange look in his eyes, The one from the Tieji branch? Old Ma nodded and said, That's right. That old man is one of the 4 Yuanying Jinren of the Tieji branch of the Kunlun party. He's also recognized as the strongest in Taoism and divine powers. It's not an exaggeration to say that he's the leader of the Tieji branch. Lu Chen nodded and said, what about Su Qingjun herself? Old Ma said, she's very outstanding. She's extremely talented. It's said that she's one of the top 4 pillars. She can be said to be very gifted. Her progress in Taoism is very fast and she's worthy of the word genius. She's only 22 years old, but she's already at the peak of the foundational state. Among the young foundational state disciples of the Kunlun party, there are about a dozen of them who've reached the peak of the Jin Dan state and are only one step away. But the most famous ones are Su Qingjun, He Yi, Song Huaisong, and Feng Yu. At this point, Old Ma paused and looked at Lu Chen. At such a young age, you are only one step away from the Golden Core realm. With this kind of strength and talent, the difference between you and an ordinary Foundation realm disciple is like heaven and earth. I don't need to say more, right? Lu Chen smiled and said, if she's lucky enough, she might have a chance to peek into the Yuanying state in the future. Yes, becoming a Zhenren. Old Ma sighed with some emotion. He then said to Lu Chen seriously, since you know it, don't think too much, okay? That girl has no grudge against you. She didn't really hurt you in the land of chaos. You don't have to go against such a proud girl, do you? Lu Chen's expression didn't change. It seemed that he didn't take this matter to heart. He said casually, I don't plan to do anything to her. I'm just curious. Old Ma stared at him for a moment, then snorted and said, that's not necessarily the case. You're full of evil tricks, sinister and cunning. Who knows what you'll do later? Let me tell you, although Kunlun's iron branch is weak, there are still 4 Yuanying Zhenren sitting there. A genius disciple like Su Qingjun would have a limitless future. Tai Ji would definitely protect her like a precious treasure. Don't look for trouble. Pay. Lu Chen spat and said, I came to Kunlun Mountain for the sake of the common people of the world, the righteous path of life, yet I had no choice but to risk my own safety to do such a dangerous thing. Why do you, this servant, always regard me as someone who is worse than the devil cult? Old Ma said seriously, you're right, that's the truth. As he said this, he suddenly lowered his head to avoid a stool that flew towards him. Then he looked around and smiled, oh yes, where's Atsu? Why don't I see it? I just brought a bag of meat bones for it. It's chewing on it in the backyard. Lu Chen said. This black dog's appetite seems to be very big. It's eating me poor. Hurry up and bring it up the mountain. Wait for another 2 months. I'm not familiar with it yet. Lu Chen said casually, oh yes, there's one more thing. Help me check it out. It's about the girl from the Yi family I told you about last time. As he said this, Lu Chen told Old Ma about the scene he saw at the spiritual field in Sherpan Valley. In the end, he frowned and said, He Gang didn't die. And looking at Yi Xian, she seems to be afraid of him. I'm afraid there's something strange about it. Okay, leave it to me, Old Ma said with a smile. Lu Chen stood up, looked at the sky, and said, all right, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. I'm going back to the mountain. Old Ma nodded and watched as Lu Chen walked to the door. Just as he was about to step over the threshold, Old Ma suddenly said, there's something you might not know. This year, the Kunlun Party's Immortal Appraisal Conference had a great harvest. The Kunlun Party had recruited many talented 3 pillars and even 4 pillars. However, there's one thing that the Kunlun Party suppressed. Lu Chen's body trembled slightly. He turned to look at Old Ma. Old Ma looked straight into his eyes. For some reason, there was a complicated and incomprehensible light in his eyes. He said softly, I heard that during the conference, they found a rare, 1 in a million peerless genius. That person had all 5 elements, and there were 5 pillars on the Sea of Qi. Lu Chen's expression changed slightly. It seemed that even a calm person like him was startled after hearing about this matter. But very quickly, a trace of a smile appeared on his face. A self-deprecating smile appeared on his face. Amazing, a 5 pillars genius. He murmured, then raised his head to look at the sky. He said lightly, just like me, isn't it? Old Ma was silent. It was already evening when he returned to the mountain. When Lu Chen walked through the mountain gate and walked along the mountain path to his residence at the foot of Shirpan Mountain, the sky gradually darkened. Night came. At night, Kunlun Mountain was still majestic, but it was less majestic than during the day, and more distant and deep in the night. Each mountain peak was like a silent giant, quietly standing in the darkness, quietly watching Lu Chen walk between the mountains. Unknowingly, there was no one else on the mountain path. Only Lu Chen walked alone. The night was somewhat desolate, and the mountain wind was somewhat cold. It whistled past, and the faint starlight shone on the ground. One could see the swaying shadows, like dancing demons and ghosts. There was still some time before the curfew. Lu Chen looked at the night sky and expressionlessly walked on this dark road. Gradually, even he himself seemed to blend into it, becoming a part of those terrifying shadows. When it was too quiet, one's thoughts would spread out, making one's thoughts seem to be more than usual. As Lu Chen walked, he suddenly thought of the small village that he had lived in for 10 years, and the beautiful girl who was already sleeping by the Dragon Lake on Tea Mountain. At this time, would there be a cold wind blowing by the Dragon Lake? Maybe she would also feel a little cold, because she was afraid of the cold before. Lu Chen suddenly shook his head, freeing himself from these thoughts, and then continued walking. The night was still cold, and then he thought of the day before they parted, the strange look in old Ma's eyes when he looked at him. Lu Chen knew what old Ma meant. Although that fatty was not a good person, but for so many years, he was the person that he trusted the most. He knew that old Ma meant well. Old Ma actually felt that it was not worth it for him, and somewhat regretted it. However, some words could not be said to anyone, whether it was him or old Ma, or perhaps everyone actually understood in their hearts. If it was not good enough, how could it be used as a successful bait? If it was not an exceptional talent, how would the evil sect elder, that kind of person, be interested in it? Sacrifice? Perhaps only that big fatty, who was always hidden in the depths of the light, was the truly ruthless and ruthless person. The mountain breeze was faint, blowing past his clothes, as if there was a bone-chilling cold. Lu Chen gently pulled his clothes, thinking that if there was a chance in the future, he should go back to the Dragon Lake on Tea Mountain to take a look, add more soil for Ding Dong's grave, and plant more trees beside it. While he was thinking of this, Lu Chen's body suddenly stopped, his footsteps abruptly stopped. In the depths of the winding mountain path hidden in the dark shadows, in the deep darkness, a soft, trembling whimper suddenly came from an unknown place. In this desolate and cold night, it sounded like the weeping of a night ghost, faintly coming over. The shadows of the surrounding tall mountains, at this moment, seemed to suddenly cover down, making this section of the mountain path seem especially dark. The night was deep, it was a desolate time. Chapter 90. The voice was intermittent and trembling, and it seemed especially ghastly and terrifying amidst the dark night and cold mountain wind, causing one to be unable to help but feel a chill run down one's spine. Although Kunlun Mountain was a spiritual mountain paradise, and it was unlikely that there would be any ghosts or spirits coming out to harm people, at this moment, it still sounded a little mournful and frightening. What if there really was a hidden demon or ghost on this mountain? Lu Chen stood where he was, his brows slightly furrowed. He listened attentively for a moment, then said to himself, "It seems to be a female ghost." After saying that, he continued to walk forward, his pace slightly slower than before. At the same time, his eyes kept looking around the mountain path ahead, as if he was looking for something. The mountain path in the night was empty. Dark shadows swayed, as if there were strange gazes hidden in the trees and bushes on both sides of the road, staring at Lu Chen's figure in the darkness. The mountain path was an old road that the Kunlun party had repaired for many years. It was mottled with wind and frost, but it was still firm and smooth, winding and stretching forward silently. The strange sound that seemed like a woman's sobbing was still drifting from ahead, but as Lu Chen walked forward, it gradually became clearer. As he walked, Lu Chen suddenly stopped. He saw a small mountain not far ahead. The mountain path passed through the mountainside, and at the same time, it branched off into a stone path. Lu Chen climbed up the small mountain. The small mountain was full of pine trees, and it was dark in the night. Even the stars in the sky were blocked, and the sweet and mournful sobbing seemed to turn here, as if it came from the mountain. The cold wind blew, and the pine trees rustled. The darkness silently stared at Lu Chen on the mountain path. Lu Chen glanced at the small mountain, then continued to walk up. The sobbing gradually became clearer, and the surrounding darkness became thicker. Not long after, Lu Chen, who was walking on the stone steps, saw a pavilion halfway up the mountain. There was a plaque outside the pavilion, but it was too dark to see the words on it. However, the most frightening thing was that there was a figure sitting at a stone table in the middle of the pavilion. Her back was facing Lu Chen, and her long hair was draped over her shoulders. Her shoulders were shaking slightly, and she was sobbing softly. One above and one below, one in front and one behind. The surroundings were thick with ghost qi. When a gust of mountain wind blew past, it lifted the strand of black hair, revealing the pale skin of the female ghost. It was as if even the air had frozen. Hey! Suddenly, a voice came from outside the pavilion with a trace of impatience, instantly breaking the gloomy atmosphere. Then, a figure stepped in and very impolitely complained to the female ghost, "Why are you howling here in the middle of the night? Is there something wrong with your brain?" Ah! The sobbing suddenly went silent. After a moment, the female ghost suddenly seemed to be shocked by herself. She suddenly let out a scream and jumped up from the stone table. She staggered back and looked at the black figure standing at the edge of the pavilion. Her trembling voice stuttered, You, don't, come here. Ghost. Even ghosts are afraid of ghosts? Lu Chen snorted unhappily and casually lit the fire lighter he carried on his body. The moment the fire lit up, it illuminated the faces of the two people in the pavilion. The frightened face of the woman on the opposite side flashed there. After a moment, the expression on her face first stiffened, then revealed a somewhat incredulous expression. She said in shock, "Brother Lu, why is it you?" At this time, the only person in the Kunlun party who would call Lu Chen Brother Lu was naturally only Yi Xian. With the dim light of the fire, Lu Chen saw Yi Xian's surprised, happy and dazed face. There were still traces of tears and her face was very haggard. He could not help but shake his head. With a wave of his hand, the fire suddenly flashed and extinguished. Darkness once again shrouded the mountain pavilion. Not sleeping in the middle of the night, but coming here to scare people. You, this young lady, are getting more and more powerful. Lu Chen walked to the stone table in the pavilion and sat down. Yi Xian stood at the side of the pavilion for a moment before carefully walking over. In the pavilion in the night, the faces of the two people became blurred in the darkness again, even if there was only a stone table between them. Perhaps it was surprise, or perhaps it was excitement. Yi Xian did not care about the slightly sarcastic joke in Lu Chen's mouth. Instead, she seemed to be a little embarrassed and shrunk her neck. After a moment, she said, "Brother Lu, why are you on this Kunlun mountain?" Lu Chen looked up at the sky and felt that there was almost an hour until midnight. There was still time, so he said, "Me? I am now a disciple of the Kunlun party." Ah. Yi Xian widened her eyes and said in shock, "What? You actually also became a disciple of the Kunlun party? Hey, don't think that I can't see the look of contempt on your face when it is dark." Yi Xian was shocked and hurriedly waved her hand. No. Brother Lu, how could I look down on you? I really didn't expect it. But it's really great that you can come to the Kunlun mountain. No matter what, Kunlun is also a famous and upright sect. You must be much better here than at the Crescent City in the land of chaos. Lu Chen glanced at her and could feel the sincere joy in this inexperienced girl's words. He felt his heart warm for no reason. Then, he shook his head and snorted. "All right, tell me. Why did you come here in the middle of the night to cry and pretend to be a ghost?" I didn't pretend to be a ghost." Yi Xian only felt her cheeks heat up. Fortunately, in this dim light, perhaps Lu Chen could not see it. She subconsciously retorted, "You, on the other hand, suddenly jumped out just now. That was really scary. Don't say that I didn't pretend to be a ghost. Even if I was a ghost, even a ghost would be scared to death by you just now. Hey, I haven't seen you for a while. You become so good at talking. Lu Chen laughed. Xian did not want to be entangled with him on this topic anymore. She hurriedly changed the topic. Brother Lu, what is your status now? Where are you arranged to be? Lu Chen said, my talent is ordinary. After I entered the sect, I could only be a servant disciple. Now, I'm planting spiritual fields in the rock valley under Baichao Tang. Ah. Xian let out a soft cry. She seemed to be in disbelief. What a coincidence. I'm also in Baichao Tang. It's really too, Her voice suddenly paused. Looking at Lu Chen, the smile on her face slowly disappeared. After a while, with some caution, she whispered to Lu Chen, Brother Lu, today, during the day, I stood in the spiritual fields and watched you come out of the forest. Then, I saw you entangle with Yi Gang until you left. Lu Chen said lightly. Xian was speechless. After a while, she heard Lu Chen sigh. Alright, now can you tell me what exactly happened? Chapter 91. The night was dim and the mountain breeze was gentle. Although it was a bit chilly, for some reason, it was no longer as gloomy as before. Instead, there was some warmth. Perhaps people were like this. As long as someone was with them, they would feel better. Loneliness was the deepest fear in the bottom of their hearts. Therefore, after a moment of silence, Xian finally told Lu Chen what had happened during this period of time. After returning to Kunwa City from the land of chaos, the Yi family, who were anxious because she had secretly left home, was naturally overjoyed. Although they scolded her a few times, they were glad that nothing serious had happened. However, there were 3 people who had left, but only one person was left when they returned. Moreover, the other 2 were genuine Kunlun disciples. Of course, this matter couldn't be easily brushed aside. Soon, someone from the Kunlun party came down to inquire about this matter. Xian truthfully told them what happened on Black Armor Mountain. At first, everyone sighed with emotion and didn't think too much about it. Even He Gang's elder brother, senior martial brother He Yi, who was well known in the Kunlun party, came over. In the end, he also left in silence and didn't make things difficult for Xian. No one believed that a little girl like Xian, who hadn't even formally entered the Kunlun party, would have the intention or ability to harm those 2 people. The following days were peaceful for a period of time. Soon, it was time for the Kunlun party's Immortal Appraisal Assembly. At this time, a message from Jean Dan Friar, who had taken a liking to Xian, came from Kunlun Mountain. The gist of the message was that Dongfang Tao, a Daoist expert, had suffered more serious injuries than expected. He still had to go into closed-door meditation for a period of time, and it was unknown when he would come out. However, Xian was already of age. If she didn't go up the mountain to learn martial arts, she would probably be delayed. Therefore, according to Dongfang Tao's arrangements, the Yi family sent Xian to Kunlun and she successfully entered a sect. In the end, Dongfang Tao arranged for her to become an official disciple in Baichao Tang. Speaking of which, the status of an official disciple was much higher than that of a servant disciple. An official disciple only needed to cultivate and did not need to do any work to obtain cultivation resources. Of course, the prerequisite for such treatment was that one had to be talented enough and have a strong background. In short, up to this point, Xian had been living a good life. She was full of hope for the future, happily cultivating on Kunlun Mountain with peace of mind. But a month later, the situation suddenly changed. He Gang, one of the 3 from that day, actually returned. According to him, he was surrounded by a pack of terrifying black jackals and crazily gnawed on him. Later, he accidentally fell off a cliff and happened to fall into a pool of water below. That was how he managed to escape. Even so, He Gang still suffered greatly. Not only was his handsome face completely ruined, his vitality was also greatly damaged. His cultivation was mostly gone and there were many serious injuries on his body. When he was discovered at the foot of Kunlun Mountain, he was already on the verge of death. No one knew how he managed to make it back. Fortunately, he had a powerful brother, He, who loved him dearly. When he found out about this, he immediately tried his best and used many good medicines and miraculous pills to save him. He even recovered most of his cultivation, which was a great fortune amidst the misfortune. But from then on, He seemed to have suddenly changed into a different person, perhaps because he had received too much stimulation in the land of chaos. His personality was abnormally extreme, and he often quarreled and provoked others. Others, on account of his pitiful experience and He's face, would usually give him some leeway. Then, He discovered Xian, who was also on Kunlun Mountain. It was hard to imagine what He was thinking when he saw Xian. But Xian was very surprised at first. Although she was a little afraid when she saw He's terrifying face, she was still happy that he had survived. But He's reaction was beyond Xian's expectation. When he saw Xian, he was stunned for a long time before he stepped back. But soon, he suddenly rushed over with a roar, grabbed Xian's hand, and asked the two of them to become cultivation companions. Then, he began to grope her. Xian was scared out of her wits. Needless to say, she resisted with all her might. After she finally escaped, she soon heard that He was spreading rumors in the Kunlun party. He said that when they went south to the land of chaos, the two of them were already in love and had privately pledged to marry each other. It was also because he was deeply in love with Xian that He had risked his life to distract all the dogs when they encountered the terrifying pack of black jackals on the Black Armor Mountain, so that Xian could escape alone and he would be doomed eternally. But now, when Xian saw that his cultivation was damaged, especially his face, she actually turned her back on him. When she heard this, Xian was completely dumbfounded. And things took a turn for the worse, especially when He's elder brother, He, felt sorry for his younger brother's misfortune and publicly said that Xian was ungrateful. For a while, there were many discussions about this matter in the Kunlun sect. Even if Xian tried her best to explain that the situation was not like that at that time, not many people openly expressed sympathy for her. At the same time, He became even more entangled with her. He came to harass her every 2 or 3 days, and insisted that she become cultivation companions with him. The scene that Lu Chen saw at the edge of the forest in Shirpan Valley during the day was the scene that had been repeated in the past few days. Hearing this, Lu Chen finally understood and did not speak for a while. It was quiet inside and outside the mountain pavilion at this moment, only the light sound of the wind could be heard. Xian quietly looked up at Lu Chen, but found that sitting across the table, he was looking at her with a pair of bright eyes, and the expression in his eyes was a little strange. "Brother Lu, why are you looking at me like that?" For some reason, Xian suddenly felt a little guilty and carefully asked. Lu Chen looked at her, thought for a while and asked, "Before I met you, there was really nothing between you and He, right?" "No, really." Xian suddenly stood up, looking anxious, and loudly said, "Brother Lu, I swear to the heavens, there is absolutely no love affair between me and senior martial brother He. At that time, I only thought of him as an older brother, and followed him and martial Uncle Han to gain experience." Lu Chen nodded, indicating for her to calm down. Then he muttered to himself for a while and said, "This matter is not a big deal. Not to mention spiritual master Yuanying, even the sect's Jin Dan friar would be too lazy to care. Oh, speaking of which, don't you also have a backer? Ask your master Dongfang Tao to come out and say something. Although that He's prospects are good, but as far as I know, Dongfang Tao is a veteran Jin Dan friar, and has achieved Jin Dan for at least 10 years. With this kind of experience, many people would have to give him face." Xian's face was sullen, and her expression was full of grievance. She said, "Master Dongfang, his injuries are not light. That day, after arranging for me to enter the sect, he went into seclusion again. He only said that after he came out, he would perform the ceremony of becoming my disciple. Before that, he first let me follow Bai Chao Tang to practice some basic techniques. I really have no choice. Lu Chen was startled, shook his head, and quietly said to himself, this old man is a good hands-off shopkeeper. Why do I feel that he is quite similar to that damn Baldy? Chapter 92. Xian didn't hear him clearly. She asked, Brother Lu, what did you say? Oh. Nothing. Lu Chen thought for a moment and said, did you tell your family? Your Yi clan can be considered an aristocratic family in Kunwa City. After so many years, you must have a good relationship with the Kunlun party. Could you ask your elders to find someone to talk to you? Xian smiled bitterly and said, I did. My family also asked someone to speak on my behalf, but... Her voice became gloomy and she said softly, our Yi clan's current situation is just a so-so. Xian didn't say anything else and Lu Chen didn't continue asking. Some principles had been the same since ancient times. Even if the world changed, it was still very difficult to change. Perhaps the Yi clan had produced outstanding talents a long time ago and passed down the clan's foundation, but the world was very realistic. Now that you were weak, your voice naturally wouldn't be loud enough. Even friendships would slowly fade with the passage of time. A powerful Jin Dan friar was enough to establish a clan that could be passed down for generations. He was such a genius that everyone thought highly of. They believed that he would definitely become Jin Dan in the future. Many people even believed that he might have a chance to become the incomparably powerful Master Yuanying. With the existence of such a figure, it was obviously not worth it for those who were not interested in fighting against him for an ordinary family that had nothing to do with them. What's more, from the beginning to the end, he had never stepped forward to make things difficult for Xian. It was just that his brother admired the girl, so he pursued her wholeheartedly. It wasn't a matter of fighting and killing, so how could he intervene? This matter seems quite troublesome. Lu Chen sighed softly and said to Xian. Xian wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes and said, Brother Lu, since you're so powerful, can you help me? Lu Chen looked at Xian and saw that she was sitting there looking at him with eyes full of expectation. After a while, Lu Chen suddenly smiled and said, Why should I help you? What's in it for me? Xian was stunned as if she didn't expect Lu Chen to suddenly say something like this. After a while, she stammered, Brother Lu, No, I don't know. I think you're a good person and you treat me very well. I thought you'd help me. Lu Chen laughed involuntarily and said, Who told you that I'm a good person? You're too simple-minded. No wonder you're being forced. Xian's face was bitter as if she didn't know what to say. In the end, she could only mumble, I just thought that Brother Lu helped me when we were in the disorienting lands, so I think you're a good person. Tisk. Lu Chen was speechless for a moment. He shook his head and thought for a while before saying, In any case, I'm not the kind of person you think I am. I can't work for free. If you want me to help you solve this matter, you'll have to pay me something. Oh, that's what I should do, Xian said repeatedly. Brother Lu, what do you want? As long as I have it, I'll give it to you. Looking at her anxious expression, it was obvious that she wanted nothing more than to get rid of He Gang's entanglement. It was obvious that she was about to go crazy. If that's the case, then repay me with your body, Lu Chen said. Xian was instantly dumbstruck. Her mouth was wide open as if she had turned into a stone. After a moment, she suddenly saw a faint smile hanging on the corner of Lu Chen's mouth. Only then did she suddenly come back to her senses. She stomped her feet in embarrassment and anger, and said angrily, Big Brother Lu, what are you doing? Lu Chen smiled and said, What's wrong? You can't take it after just one sentence? Lu Chen said, I saw that when He Gang came to pester you, you looked embarrassed, angry, and panic-stricken from beginning to end. You didn't even have the strength to fight back. Are your feelings then the same as now? Xin seemed to understand, but her cheeks still felt a little hot. She said in a low voice, more or less. Humph. Lu Chen sneered with a bit of undisguised mockery. Xin suddenly felt that her face was even hotter. Then she heard Lu Chen say, I'll help you with this matter, but I haven't thought about what the reward will be. I'll owe you for now. Just remember to help me with this matter in the future. Okay. Hearing Lu Chen's words, Xin suddenly felt that she had seen a ray of light in the darkness. She hurriedly agreed and then looked at Lu Chen with a face full of expectation, as if she had seen an omnipotent god. Her gaze was so hot that even a thick-skinned person like Lu Chen couldn't bear it. He glared at her and then said, I've thought about this matter from beginning to end. I think your biggest problem now is that you have no way to ask for help. If your Jin Dan stage master comes out, maybe you won't be in such a difficult situation? Xin said without hesitation, of course, Master Dongfang loves me the most. If he comes out, he definitely won't sit idly by. Well, then it's clear. The most important thing now is to let you endure until your master comes out. There are ways, very simple, 2 ways. Xin's eyes suddenly brightened. Looking at Lu Chen with some admiration, she quickly said, Brother Lu, quickly teach me. Lu Chen stretched out the first finger and said, First, you pretend to be courteous to He Gang and pretend to be perfunctory. First, you can calm him down. If necessary, you can even let him take advantage of you. Endure until your master comes out and officially accepts you as a disciple. Then you can turn hostile. Xin was stunned for a moment. She suddenly shook her head and resolutely said, No. Lu Chen looked at her and asked, Why? Xin's face was full of disgust and said, That person is so disgusting now. Every time he comes to pester me, he talks and does things like he wants to eat me. I can't stand it. Lu Chen nodded to show that he understood and then said, Since that's the case, then there's a second way. But you should also understand the current situation, so to use this method, it depends on whether you are ruthless enough. Xin looked a little confused and said, Brother Lu, what do you want me to do? What do you mean ruthless enough? Lu Chen smiled and waved at her. Xin walked to his side and slightly bent down. Then she saw Lu Chen whispering something in her ear. As Xin listened, the expression on her face slowly changed. First, she was indescribably shocked, then her body trembled slightly, as if she was excited and afraid. In the middle, there was a complicated expression of blushing. After a long while, she straightened her body in a daze and turned to look at Lu Chen. She said with some difficulty, Is this okay? At this moment, it was the dead of night. That man was silent, just quietly sitting by the table in the pavilion. For some reason, Xin suddenly had a strange illusion. The man in front of her seemed to suddenly become especially strange. At that moment, Xin only felt that the surrounding darkness was like a tide, surrounding that man, making his face unclear, making him hide in the darkness. Even that faint smile that he occasionally revealed seemed to carry a trace of the coldness and sternness of the night. After a while, sitting in the darkness, Lu Chen said indifferently, I already said, I'm not a good person. Chapter 93. Time flowed by as the moon set and the clouds rose. Within the enormous Kunlun Mountains, countless people were busy walking their own paths. However, compared to the towering mountains, people were often like extremely tiny ants. They were busy doing their own thing all day long, yet they forgot to raise their heads to look at the boundless sky. Xin walked on the road of Rockpan Mountain, her face calm, without any extra expression. She was an official disciple, so she did not have to work all day long in exchange for a meager pay like the handyman disciples. However, she still needed help with some things like sorting and identifying spiritual materials. Besides, this kind of work also had great benefits. She could identify many useful spiritual materials, familiarize herself with their properties, and lay a solid foundation for her future alchemy or exploration. There were many huge rocks on Rockpan Mountain. One of the branch halls of Baichao Tang was built on the big rocks on the mountain. From afar, one could see the flying eaves and blue tiles. It looked extraordinary. Xian was not the only one on the road. There were many disciples of Baichao Tang who had the same status as her coming and going. Many people noticed Xian, and many people pointed at her and whispered to each other. Rumors were bound to spread at all times. Xian didn't look at her fellow disciples. As she walked, the conversation she had with Lu Chen a few days ago, as well as some of the instructions he had given her after that, couldn't help but echo in her mind. In the vicinity of Rock Mountain, from 100 Herb Hall's branch, are there any female Jindan masters with profound cultivation and bad tempers? This was what Lu Chen had asked her that day. There are. There are many female disciples in Baichao Tang. There are also a few female Jindan friar who are successful in cultivation. The one who came recently is Martial Uncle Yen of Melaleuca japonica. She is strict, and all the disciples are afraid of her. Great. God is on your side. But the great cultivators of Jindan state never bother to know, and they don't care about our trivial matters. Then we'll force her to know, force her to take care of it. Ah. How can I do that? That depends on whether you are ruthless enough. Big brother Lu, you're saying that again. I always feel scared when I hear it. The warm sunlight shone down on Xian's body, making her feel a trace of warmth. She took a deep breath and forced herself to reveal a trace of a smile before walking towards the hall. The day passed uneventfully. In the afternoon, Xian walked out of the main hall and began to walk down the mountain. When she arrived at the foot of the mountain, she pretended to casually glance at the flat and spacious spiritual fields. She saw many odd-job disciples working hard in the spiritual fields at the foot of the mountain. Unsurprisingly, she found a familiar face among them. Inconspicuous, Lu Chen stood in a spiritual field and smiled at her from afar. For some reason, seeing that smile, Xian seemed to feel a little more support in her heart, and her originally panicked mind calmed down a little. But before she could think of what to do, suddenly, a gloomy and even somewhat hostile voice suddenly came from not far away. Junior Sister E, what a coincidence. We meet again. Xian's heart jumped, and her hands subconsciously clenched into fists. Then she turned her head to look, and what entered her eyes was that extremely ugly and frightening face. Xian slowly lowered her head, and there seemed to be a little fear on her face. She said in a low voice, Senior brother He Gang looked at Xian's pretty face, and saw that the fear and weakness not only did not damage her beauty in the slightest, but instead added a bit of sadness and delicateness to her beauty. He felt as if a scorching flame suddenly burned in his heart, like a wild beast suddenly roaring in his body. His eyes revealed a look of greed and desire, but his tone was very calm. He only smiled and said, Junior Sister E, I have something to say to you. Xian slightly raised her eyes, looked at that face, and found that when He Gang smiled, the scar on his face twitched, that face became more and more frightening. She couldn't help but take a step back, and after 2 hurried breaths, said, Senior brother He, if you have something to say, you can say it here. Here? He Gang sneered, looked at the many handyman disciples in the surrounding spiritual fields, and a look of contempt appeared in his eyes. He said, There are too many people here, Junior Sister E, let's go to a place with fewer people to talk. As he spoke, He Gang walked towards the forest that day. Xian's expression changed slightly, and she looked a little hesitant. He Gang suddenly turned back, and with a ferocious look, he shouted fiercely, Junior Sister E. Xian's face showed a painful expression, but in the end, she finally slowly walked out, and followed He Gang into the forest. This scene fell into the eyes of many handyman disciples, and even many official disciples of Baichao Tang who passed by and watched from afar also saw it. For a moment, everyone looked at each other. The forest was very quiet. He Gang looked very happy that Xian had to follow him, and he walked in front proudly. Xian, on the other hand, slowly followed behind him. Lu Chen's words to her echoed in her mind. Every single word sounded simple and clear, but it was as if a knife was stabbing into her heart, and it was filled with pain and determination. I told you to be ruthless, not to be ruthless to He Gang, because it's useless. Nowadays, there are countless rumors about He Gang. Even if you kill him, you won't be able to shut people's mouths. Instead, you'll become the target of gossip, and your Yi family will definitely not be able to withstand He Yi's vengeance. He Gang is the one who wants you, and wants to skin you alive. I don't know about He Yi, but maybe someone like him needs all the resources to help him break through to the Jin Dan. He might even be tempted by your Yi family's property. What do you think? You'll lose both your wealth and your family. Can you stand it? Can't stand it? That's why you have to be ruthless to yourself. You have to be ruthless to yourself to the point where everyone is scared and in disbelief. Then, everyone will believe you. In this world, how can there be such a comfortable thing as reaping without sowing? Even if there is, it's not between you and me. That's why you have to be ruthless to yourself. Lu Chen said with a smile. Yi Xian recalled that night, Lu Chen's voice and blurry face in the dark. She suddenly shuddered. She stared fixedly at He Gang, who had stopped in front of her and turned around to look at her with a hateful smile. Her eyes twitched, and her body trembled slightly. All of this fell into He Gang's eyes. He looked at Yi Xian as if he was looking at a weak little chick. A tyrannical emotion seemed to rise from his heart. That terrifying scene of countless ferocious black dogs barking and biting each other flashed across his mind, causing him to tremble uncontrollably. He was scared. He was scared to death. Every time he dreamed of that scene, he would be scared to the point of peeing his pants. And every time he saw Yi Xian's beautiful face, he would angrily think, why was she able to escape safely, while he had to suffer like that? Everything was her fault. I want to let her taste that kind of pain. Ruthlessly ravage her, torture her, make her scream in pain. He crazily imagined it, as if this was the only way he could feel uncontrollable pleasure. It was at this time, He Gang heard Yi Xian open her mouth, and with a trembling voice, she said, Senior brother, don't force me like this, okay? That young girl seemed like she was about to cry. There were tears in the corner of her eyes, and as if she had gathered all her courage, she said this to him. Chapter 94. He Gang sneered, his white teeth peeking out from his missing mouth. He looked especially ferocious, like a wolf or tiger. Yi Xian took another step back and said in a trembling voice, Don't force me, senior brother He Gang spat and said fiercely, I want to force you, so what? I'll tell you clearly, I want you. Follow me faithfully for the rest of your life. When my big brother reaches the golden core or nascent soul stage, you and your Yi clan will enjoy endless wealth and glory. Yi Xian's face was pale as she shook her head. After a while, she smiled bitterly. Our Yi family. So you really coveted our family property? He Gang suddenly frowned, as if he felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't think of what it was, so he didn't bother to say more. With a wild laugh, he strode towards Yi Xian, and at the same time, reached out to grab her, and said with a smile, Junior sister Yi, I've missed you for a long time, today you, clang. A crisp sound abruptly interrupted He Gang's words. His body stopped, only to see Yi Xian pull out a sharp dagger and hold it horizontally in front of her. Her face carried a bit of determination, mixed with a bit of pain and despair, and even a bit of madness that He Gang had never seen before. It was vaguely similar to the look in He Gang's eyes before. He Gang jumped in fright, but he sneered. What are you doing? Trying to scare me with a dagger? Stab me if you dare. Let's see if anyone from your Yi family can survive after you kill me. Yi Xian gritted her teeth and stared blankly in front of her. Her vision blurred and she could almost hear her own painful and hopeless question from that day. Why, Brother Lu, why? They were the ones who bullied me, but you want me to be cruel to myself? Lu Chen's calm yet cold voice came from the darkness, echoing in her ears. Because you're weak. But there's no justice in this world. Yes, there's no justice, there's no reason. This is how the world works. Either you lie down and admit defeat and allow others to bully you, or you try your best to find some methods within your power, even if those methods seem painful and uncomfortable. You want me to give you justice and righteousness? I'm sorry, I don't have any. I'm not a good person, I can only teach you these things. Ah, Xian suddenly screamed, like a little beast that was forced into a desperate situation. Her fear was not directed towards the ugly man in front of her, but rather towards an invisible aura. She trembled all over. When Gang saw this, he was so excited that his body was trembling. He let out a roar, and his eyes were bloodshot. He suddenly rushed over and grinned, "Stinking whore, today I'll call you, damn whore, today I'll call you." The low muffled sound wasn't loud, but it was like a sudden clap of thunder. Gang instantly stopped in his tracks and looked at Xian with a stunned and incredulous expression. That girl, that beautiful girl, had a pained expression on her face at this moment. However, her hand was gripping the dagger tightly, and she had stabbed it into her own body with a backhand. The dagger was incomparably sharp and pierced through her left shoulder. It could be imagined that Xian used all her strength. Dark red blood gushed out like a fountain and dyed half of Xian's clothes red. Xian's pale lips trembled slightly. She slowly pulled the dagger out from her flesh. The pain was like a tide that was about to drown this fragile woman. There were a few times when she felt that she was about to collapse. She was about to be unable to bear it, but for some reason, she still stood there, standing in the pool of blood, coldly looking at the dumbfounded Gang opposite her. Suddenly, she felt a sense of pleasure amidst the pain. That ugly man was not as strong as she thought. Then she slowly lowered her head. Looking at the bloody wound, she shook her head. That ghostly cold voice seemed to be emotionless. Vaguely, it was saying terrible words to her. Since you have decided to be ruthless, then be more ruthless. Since you have decided to do it, then you must do it to the extreme. Isn't that right? Isn't that right? She smiled bitterly. Within the bloody light, there was a terrifying decisiveness that shouldn't have been present at her age. She suddenly screamed, and then held the blade upside down. She suddenly flipped it over and directly cut off her own flower-like, jade-like face. Gang was scared silly. At this time, he was really scared out of his wits. He stood there, dumbfounded at this bloody scene. He was completely at a loss, and his mind was blank. The feeling of the cold blade cutting through flesh made one's body feel like it was going to fall apart. Xian's body trembled non-stop. She gasped for breath, as if this was the only way she could persevere. But in her weak body, there seemed to be an unimaginable terrifying power that kept her going until now. Fresh blood dyed her body red. It was a ghastly sight to behold. However, she was like a phoenix rising from nirvana in the pool of blood. She looked down at the ugly man from above and saw the fear in his eyes. Thus, there was a bit of contempt in her eyes. She thought to herself, so, what Brother Lu said was true. She laughed maniacally, shook her head, and did not look at Gang again. She suddenly raised the dagger and slashed her clothes, directly cutting several wounds on her body. In an instant, blood spurted out. Then, she threw the dagger away and used her hands to tear open her clothes, revealing a piece of originally snow-white soft skin that was now dyed red with blood. The beautiful body that was hidden under the clothes looked unusually bright red, and there was a kind of tragedy that could not be looked at directly. Then, she raised her head again. This forest was as quiet as the bridge of helplessness in the underworld. It was like the terrifying sea of blood in the hell of evil spirits. She didn't know why, but there was suddenly a relieved smile on her face. She just smiled like that. Then, she suddenly let out an incomparably sharp scream. She staggered out of the forest. Along the way, blood flowed all over the ground, dyeing the entire road red. Gang still hadn't come back to his senses. He stood there in a daze. His eyes fell on the dark red pool of blood on the ground. It seemed that he still hadn't broken free from the tragic scene that had just occurred. After a while, outside the forest, there was a sudden commotion. Some people cried out, some people shouted angrily. There was also a woman's voice that was already crying. Someone, quickly come and save junior sister E. Medicine. Who has medicine to stop the bleeding? Why is she bleeding so much? No, quickly go to the mountain and ask Marshal Aunt Yen to come down. Only she can save junior sister E. In the midst of the chaos, the commotion became bigger and bigger. It seemed to gradually converge into a raging tide, crazily surging in all directions. In the spirit field behind the crowd, a man stood far away and watched this terrifying scene from beginning to end. When the crowd gathered, he expressionlessly raised his head and looked at the sky. The sky was blue and cloudless. Today was a sunny day. Chapter 95. The incident that took place at the foot of Rock Mountain that day was witnessed by many Bai Chao Tang disciples and even more Chor's disciples. When the blood-soaked woman staggered out of the forest, the horrifying scene instantly shocked everyone. Dark red blood flowed on that beautiful face, piercing into everyone's eyes like a sharp knife, causing their eyes to sting. They held their breath and tensed up involuntarily. Like a boulder thrown into the water, it instantly set off a monstrous wave. The Kunlun party was, after all, a prestigious and upright sect. Jean Dan Friar Melaleuca Japonica, who was in charge of the Bai Chao Tang sect on Rock Mountain, immediately rushed down the mountain after receiving the news to protect Xin and heal her. At the same time, someone noticed that someone was trying to sneak out of the forest. It was He Gang, so he immediately shouted for them to expose him. Thinking of all the things that happened before, the crowd was instantly agitated and many people cursed out loud. However, He Gang's elder brother, He was too famous. Although the crowd was angry, no one dared to stop them. At this moment, the white-haired Melaleuca Japonica suddenly appeared next to He Gang without saying a word. Then, she slapped him hard in the face. That afternoon, at the edge of the forest at the foot of Rock Mountain, everyone heard the crisp sound of bones breaking and the man's heart-wrenching scream. Of course, no one paid attention to him. By evening, the incident had spread throughout the Kunlun party and caused a sensation in all sections. The Yi family of Kunwu City had rushed to the mountain after hearing the news. It was said that the scene was so tragic that the girl's mother fainted when she saw her daughter. Xian's father and other relatives and friends were all furious. Bai Chao Tang's sect was one of the most important sects in the Kunlun party. It was powerful and well established. In just one day, 2 Yuanying Zhenren and 7 Jean Dan Friar immortals came directly to Rock Mountain. At night, the huge mountain was still brightly lit. Countless people came in and out. The sky was full of colorful lights and colorful rainbows flew across the sky, making the moon and stars dim. It was the immortal masters and Zhenren who came on clouds and wind, like the eve of a storm. He Gang wanted to escape, but Melaleuca Japonica broke his bones on the spot and caught him. He was thrown at the foot of Rock Mountain, howling and screaming. No one came near and no one dared to save him. When night fell, someone from the Rock Mountain passed down the order. He Gang was tied up and hung on a big tree in front of the mountain, facing the boundless spirit fields and countless onlookers of the odd job disciples. This was, of course, an undisguised insult and venting of anger. He Gang screamed and defended himself, saying that Xin was a bitch and that she did everything herself. She stabbed herself and it had nothing to do with He Gang. In the cold mountain wind, He Gang's voice gradually became hoarse and weak. In the end, others could only hear him calling his brother's name in a low voice. But this night, he never showed up. He Gang was also hung for the whole night. Within the sects of Kunlun, every hall on every mountain peak seemed to have smelled something that night. Everyone was silent. And among the huge mountains of Kunlun, there seemed to be a sense of mutual hostility that night. The next morning, there was news from the powerful, Heavenly Soldier Hall, which was in charge of the magic weapon refining and the forging of celestial weapons in the Kunlun party. De Congenren, who had a high reputation in the Heavenly Soldier Hall, summoned his most beloved disciple, He, to the famous, Heavenly Fire Hall, of the Kunlun party and reprimanded him for a long time. He knelt on the ground and did not dare to speak. It was even said that De Congenren, in his rage, directly hit and slapped and kicked He, causing He to repeatedly kowtow in front of the hall until his face was bruised and bleeding. However, when the news came, the stone mountain did not seem to be moved at all. The entire mountain was silent, like an angry giant beast, coldly looking at its opponent in the Kunlun mountain range. The atmosphere in the Kunlun party became more and more tense the next day. The disciples of the Heavenly Soldier Hall suddenly could not get elixirs from the elixir room. In the argument, the disciples on both sides, especially the disciples of Bai Chao Tang, became more and more provocative. The situation even seemed to be worsening. But on this night, the head of the Kunlun party, Immortal Idol Month, suddenly arrived at the stone mountain. Together with her was the chief elder of the Heavenly Soldier Hall, De Congenren. They first went to visit Xian, who was seriously injured and on the verge of death. Of course, under the care and treatment of so many powerful cultivators of Bai Chao Tang, Xian's injuries had greatly improved. Then, Immortal Idol Month came forward to host the meeting. She summoned De Congenren and the two immortal masters of Bai Chao Tang, Qian Deng and Ming Zhu. They found a quiet room to talk behind closed doors. They chatted for half a day. However, when they walked out of the door, everyone on the rock mountain saw the four highly respected Yuan Yingzhenren smiling. They were like celestial beings who did not eat the food of the mortal world. They greeted each other, looked forward to the bright future of Kunlun, talked about the hardships on the road of cultivation, and only said that the celestial path was brilliant, and that it was the right path of the mortal world. De Congenren then took his leave and floated away. During this time, he never mentioned He Gang, who was still hanging on the big tree at the foot of the stone mountain. The people of Bai Chao Tang also seemed to have forgotten about this matter. After this, the matter quickly subsided. He Gang was released after being hung for 3 days. His brother, He, picked him up and sent him out of Kunlun Mountain. He found a house in Kunwu City to stay and recuperate. It seemed that he wouldn't return to the mountain for a while. After finishing this matter, He immediately announced to everyone that he would follow his master's order and immediately go into closed-door training to comprehend and break through the incomparably difficult Jin Dan realm. Everything was like a breeze blowing. After the turbulence, it finally gradually calmed down. The majestic Kunlun was still the same as before. Everything was as usual. Late at night, the stone mountain was no longer as lively and tense as it was a few days ago. After the lights dimmed, there was only silence. It was unknown how many people had entered the land of dreams at this moment. The darkness of the night seemed to be everywhere. A shadow that blended with the darkness quietly moved forward in the darkness. It silently passed through the houses, bypassed the guards, and finally stopped outside a house in the depths of the mountain. The window was gently closed. As if the night wind blew in, it made a squeaking sound and swayed a little. On the bed in the house, Xian turned over and rubbed her eyes sleepily. Suddenly, her body trembled and she sat up abruptly. She found that there was suddenly an extra shadow beside her bed. But before she could scream, a large hand had already covered her mouth, forcing her to swallow all her cries. You're tuning in to the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.